This romance was a new chapter for him, an opportunity to live a youthful life with someone that's very beautiful.
They were headed back to Southern California to celebrate their first Thanksgiving together.
The smell coming out of the bag was not something you can describe.
So the coroner investigator comes out, and he said, "This is a human."
And the lifestyle that she thought she was going to live was all a lie.
Things started to fall apart a little bit.
She wanted payback.
I did all this in 2 hours. Shut him up.
That's strange. And not only strange, that is insane.
I couldn't believe I did what I did.
In the city of Costa Mesa, the California dream is alive and well.
Costa Mesa is a relatively small town, and it is sunny all the time. A lot of people will settle in Costa Mesa because they can be so close to the beach without having to buy really expensive property.
It's around 2 p.m. on December 1st, 1991, when Costa Mesa resident Jose Escoval calls 911. He tells the operator of a concerning interaction he just had with his ex-girlfriend.
Jose receives a knock on his door.
He did look out the window and see a red Corvette in his driveway. Didn't recognize the car. He opened the door, and it was a former girlfriend, somebody that had lived with him on and off. He'd broken up a year ago, but still maintained a relationship. She was very disheveled, very upset, had gloves on her hands, wanted his help. So he invited her into the apartment, and she sat down and basically told him she wanted to elicit his help, his car, to get rid of her husband's body.
He says, "Hold on, just stay right there."
As soon as he was able to get out of her presence, he went straight to a payphone to call the police and say, "Hey, I need some help."
He identifies the woman as Omaima Nelson. Her husband's name is Bill.
Police dispatchers told him to stay put. An officer would meet with him very soon.
Born in 1935 and raised in Texas, Bill Nelson left a big impression.
Bill was a flamboyant kind of a man. He drove a red Corvette.
He was a dyed-in-the-wool Texan, known for his red cowboy boots and big belt buckles, and gregarious personality, fun to be around, liked to engage people, had a very bubbly personality, told tall tales and things of that nature.
This guy was larger than life in more ways than one. I mean, we're talking 6'4", 230 pounds, wearing red cowboy boots and a red hat. And many people, they took to Bill.
Bill Nelson had several wives, and he had kids with those wives, and he had grandkids with those kids. His first wife, I believe they lived in Florida, and his second wife in Texas, his third wife in Texas.
To earn a living, Bill was a jack of all trades.
Bill Nelson was a pilot. He crop dusted. He had a knowledge of computers to the point where he could take old ones apart and reassemble them and then at some point sell them. He also worked for a mortgage company.
By the early 90s, Bill was living in California. In the fall of 1991, he met a beautiful young woman who was also half his age.
One night at the pool hall, Omaima, she walks in, just kind of perusing the place. He said, "Who is that? Those high cheekbones, that beautiful hair?" She was this Egyptian goddess, and he wanted to know more. Omaima was born in southern Egypt along the Nile River, kind of near the Sudanese border, and she was really born into a village that was really poor.
Omaima was raised in a Muslim household. She was devout. She met a oil worker while she was back in Egypt, and they started a relationship. When her mother heard that the relationship was getting kind of serious, she insisted that they get married. And at some point after the marriage, he was called back to Houston, Texas, and she accompanied him.
Around age 18, Omaima is faced with the possibility of the American dream, to live a totally different life. When she arrived, she spoke minimal English. Imagine being in a country where you are not able to stand up for yourself, you're not able to communicate your basic needs outside of your partner, you rely on him for everything.
He turned out to be a violent man. So she became a battered woman at 18 here in America. She managed to get help from a battered women's shelter and get away from him.
In 1987, Omaima left Texas and headed for California.
After divorcing her first husband, she moved in with her sister in San Clemente, California, located south of Costa Mesa. And she took up several jobs, one of which was being a model at some lingerie place in the mall.
She was a beautiful, beautiful woman with high cheekbones and, people would look her way. But the money wasn't coming in fast enough. She wanted more. She was attracted to these older men. To her, they provided protection, they provided stability, and they provided money.
Omaima had the belief that if she found a nice older man, that man would both take care of her and be kind.
And at 23 years old, Omaima met 56-year-old Bill Nelson at a bar.
She sees a big old statuesque guy. He was commanding the entire room, telling his stories, had everybody captivated.
Bill wooed Omaima with his cowboy persona and promises of a better life.
He may have mentioned that he, lived a lavish life, had a red Corvette, may have even owned a cattle ranch.
For Mr. Nelson, I imagine this romance was a new chapter for him, an opportunity to live a young, joyful, youthful life with someone that's very beautiful.
Once Omaima and Bill Nelson met each other, they were inseparable for days at a time, even a couple of weeks before he decided, you know what, I want you to meet my family. So they took a road trip to Arkansas and Texas, and that's where his family was. And on that trip, they made a big decision. He made the decision to propose to her, and not just propose, but within a day, it's time to get married.
And he drove to Phoenix, Arizona, where a justice of the peace married him.
The newlyweds continued their road trip, sharing the good news with Bill's family.
Omaima was elated. She finally found a family that she felt like she gelled with. She really felt this sense of belonging thanks to Bill, her new husband.
Following the road trip, the couple looked forward to spending the holidays together.
They were headed back to Southern California to celebrate their first Thanksgiving together.
But 3 days after Thanksgiving, Omaima's ex, Jose Escobar, calls 911 to report that Omaima showed up at his doorstep, asking him to help move Bill's body.
Police dispatchers told him to stay put, that they'd have officers running over to his house on Monte Vista, but an officer would meet with him very soon.
While Jose waits at the payphone, officers head to his home.
When police get to Joel's residence, Omaima's inside. And one of the officers goes inside to speak with her, start asking her some questions.
She's dressed all in black. She's got a black blazer on, black pants, even black leather gloves on her hands.
When asked about her husband, Omaima says he is out of town.
He'd spent Thanksgiving with her on Thursday, and on Friday he'd left for a business trip, and she expected him back the following Friday. Asked her kind of the circumstances around her connection to Jose, and she said she'd known him, past boyfriend. She'd come over to see if she could stay there because Bill was gone.
There was another police officer, a couple of them outside, and that's when they spotted that red Corvette.
We looked inside the Corvette. Officer Hogue spotted a 50-gallon trash bag, which was tied at the top, sitting on the front seat. So Officer Hogue removed it and set it down on the front yard grass and cut it open with a penknife. The smell is not something you can describe.
On December 1st, 1991, a bizarre scene is unfolding at a home in Costa Mesa, California.
Parked out front of the location was a Corvette, and Officer Hogue looked inside and saw a big trash bag that was tied at the top, sitting in plain view. Then Officer Hogue cut the bag open with a penknife he had. At that point, we could see a liquid substance in the bag, and the smell that was emanating from the bag was so powerful.
Meanwhile, officers find the homeowner, Jose Escoval, at a nearby payphone. Jose explains what prompted him to call 911.
About 2 in the afternoon, somebody was knocking on the door, and he looked out, saw the red Corvette, opened the door, and it was Omaima. She removed the black gloves that she was wearing. He saw that her hands had been cut with what looked like a knife. She had bruises on her arms, on her legs, so he invited her into the apartment.
She says, I need your help. Jose says, with what? She tells him that her husband attacked her and she ended up killing him.
She killed him, cut him up. She had a trash bag in the car right now and would pay him a huge sum of money if he would just help her.
I just need to move his body. And then she offers him $75,000 and 2 motorcycles if he actually obliges. He says, hold on, just stay right there.
Jose left the house and found a payphone and called 911.
Back at Jose's house, a grim discovery is underway.
The whole show was this bag that was in the back of the Corvette. One of the officers had taken the bag out of the car, opened it up. I look inside the bag, and I'm not really sure what I'm looking at. It just looks kind of nasty. I said, you know, this could be pig entrails for all I know. The thing that went through my mind, I need to identify this as human. Because I'm still thinking, this is some kind of gag. This is some kind of misdirection of some sort. I'm just still not believing that this is human internal parts that are in this bag. So we're going to need a coroner out here. So the coroner investigator comes out. We opened up a big plastic cloth to the ground, and we got the remains out onto the cloth. And then all of a sudden he says, hey, you better look at this. I go, what? He says, do you know what those little black spots on this organ is? I said, I got no idea what that is. He said, that's carbon. I said, it is? He said, yeah. I said, you know where that comes from? I said, no. He said, it comes from smoking. And he said, so unless you know any pigs that smoke, this is a human.
Investigators turn to Omaima.
We introduced ourselves, said obviously we don't want to really be talking out here on the street. Would you mind accompanying us to the police department for an interview? And she agreed.
But law enforcement has another priority before they talk to Omaima.
We were able to determine from her identification where she lived with her husband.
Officers immediately went over to that apartment to see if there was, somebody in distress, somebody hurt.
It was locked. We obtained a key from the manager. I decided we had exigent circumstances to enter the apartment to see if there was someone inside that was injured and needed medical assistance. Upon entering the apartment, we instantly ascertained that nothing was amiss in the living room. Nothing seemed out of place. Upon entering the bedroom, Officer Hogan and I entered together, and we saw blood spots on the side of a mattress. We then walked back out of the bedroom and entered the kitchen area, which was a mess. Sitting on the counter was a crock pot. There was a lot of dishes in the sink and on the countertop. And for some reason, I decided to open the top freezer door of the refrigerator, and I saw this round object in foil. And I tapped on it with my finger and said to Officer Hogue, "Hey, Danny, I wonder if this is his head or side of ham."
Officers with the Costa Mesa Police Department make troubling discoveries inside the home of Omaima and Bill Nelson.
We saw blood spots on the side of the mattress.
They go to the freezer, open it up, big ball of aluminum foil.
We had the right, upon entering the apartment under exigent circumstances, to look to see what's in plain sight or even in a closet. But we would need a search warrant to get back into the apartment and to make a detailed search.
As they wait for the warrant to come through, investigators conduct an interview with Omaima.
We got to the station and escorted her to an interview room. She wanted a cigarette. It was obvious that she was distressed. She was talking a mile a minute. She had cuts and bruises all over her.
I had fight and bought. What happened? Well, I went for a drink and two girls fight with me there and they got scratched.
Where is Bill away right now? Is he here in town or is he out of town or where is he?
He's out of town.
Did you tell Jose today that you killed your husband?
No, I did not.
What do you know about the garbage sack that was in your car?
Well, what is it?
Well, I'm asking you. What do you know about it?
I didn't know nothing about it.
Don't know anything about it? Oh.
Omaima offers an explanation.
She said Jose had, under false pretext, wanted to drive the red Corvette, had left for an hour, and when he came back, that bag must have been in it. So Jose must have put the bag in the car. Then she said she'd been to a laundromat doing laundry earlier in the day and decided to walk next door to a bar, but left her car unlocked. And during that time, somebody must have put a bag behind the front passenger seat. She didn't know anything about it. It would go from one extreme to the other. It was very non-cogent.
The interview goes on, and Omaima's story continues to change.
And then at some point she said that Bill had raped her.
He went tied me up. And I said, no, tied me up.
What did he tie you to?
To the bed.
Did you kill Bill because he did this to you? Tell him the truth of it.
I didn't burn.
Just after 10 p.m., the interview ends, as Omaima is escorted to the hospital for a physical examination.
A search warrant was granted for the premises, and I responded over to serve the search warrant at about 2 in the morning.
Investigators start in the bedroom, where the patrol officers spotted blood.
Next to what I presume was Bill's side of the bed were a pair of red cowboy boots and some boot shining materials on a rug. To the first eye, it looks okay.
The bed was made, mattress was on top. You lift the mattress and the blood was underneath it.
It's saturated with blood and the box spring. And then you realize that there was a headboard at one point on that bed, but the headboard was broken into several pieces and it was stashed behind the head of the bed. Did a search of the closet. small steam iron in the corner of the closet was broken. The handle was broken off of it. Wrapped up in newspaper in the closet was also a porcelain lamp that had been broken and a crushed lampshade.
Investigators moved to the living room.
There was boxes piled up, computer parts piled up, laying around.
We saw that most all of these boxes contained trash bags, and in those trash bags were other trash bags, and in those trash bags were what appeared to be human body parts.
The disturbing scene becomes even more troubling.
We did find a box that had 2 human hands in it. It was obvious that the hands were cooked. They looked to be fried or something. Detectives were searching the kitchen, and officers started going through the refrigerator, the freezer.
They locate the large item wrapped in foil.
Take that out, open it up. It looked like a human head. I mean, that looked like a prop out of a horror movie, is what it looked like.
And also wrapped in a piece of tinfoil were genitals, male genitals. The genitals appeared as if they'd also been cooked and wrapped in tinfoil.
This is a house of horrors. It was pretty shocking.
Investigators question whether Omaima is physically capable of such violence.
The thing for me is she's petite, and I knew from Mr. Nelson's driver's license that he was, over 6 foot, 250 pounds. But in one particular box, in amongst the trash bags, were a pair of human legs, and those legs had ligature marks around the ankles. At the foot of the bed was a wicker clothes hamper full of dirty clothes, and in amongst those clothes were what appeared to be bloody garments. There was a necktie, men's necktie that was tied like a ligature. There was a section of rope that had some knots in it that appeared to be a ligature.
She says that Bill tied her to a bed, but Bill was the one with ligature marks. So everything she was saying was a lie.
On the morning of December 2nd, 1991, Omaima Nelson returns to the Costa Mesa police station following an examination at a local hospital. She is met with handcuffs.
Well, I'm going to be placing you under arrest at this time.
Why?
For suspicion of murder.
I didn't kill him. I didn't kill him.
I remember driving with my partner down to the coroner's office to witness the autopsy. We get to the coroner's office, and the watch commander calls and says, "Hey, Omaima wants to talk to you again."
Just tell me what you want to tell me and I'll listen.
I think I did kill him unconscious.
You think you killed him unconscious?
Yeah, because he did this to me, and I couldn't believe I did what I did.
Omaima claimed that her husband became physically abusive shortly after the wedding. She told police that she began to cope with the abuse through drinking alcohol and using drugs. During this time, she also told them that she started having visual hallucinations and auditory hallucinations, telling her to murder her husband.
So all I remember that I hit him to self-defense or something.
How did you hit him?
I think I hit him with a lamp or something to get off me.
How did you kill him?
I don't remember how I killed him.
Omaima does remember bits of the gory events that followed.
I did all this in 2 hours. Chopped him up pieces in 2 hours.
Chopped you up? Bill in 2 hours?
Yeah. And all I remember that his head was flying from his body, hit the ceiling up there, and made a blood in the ceiling. And I fall asleep, and I get up in the morning, and I found the trash bags, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe what happened.
She said that she heard voices. The Egyptian gods were helping her, telling her things.
She was telling me that who killed, he must die. Who killed, he killed. And she turned around and she walked away. And the next when I get up, I checked, I find my name and his name was written by blood in the mirror. It said, me and you.
What was written in blood?
Me and you.
Did you cook some parts of Bill before you wrapped him up in the plastic?
No, I'm not eating meat or much either. I don't eat meat.
You don't eat meat?
No, I don't eat meat.
You're a vegetarian?
Vegetarian, yes.
She would go from voices, I'm hearing people from the dead telling me these things, and Bill's head's here, and he's cut up, and there's body parts all over this place. She didn't really confess to anything other than she blacked out, she heard voices, there was a phone call, somebody said, look in the freezer, look in the trash bags. It didn't make any sense. There's no continuity to this thing. She was all over the map.
Well, I think you're telling me part of the truth, but not all of it.
Well, I think I need to talk to the psychiatrist to just see the last of my life.
We kind of sized her up as somebody that was just grasping at straws, trying to work herself out of this bad situation.
Following the interrogation, investigators get word that the coroner has positively identified the remains as Bill Nelson.
The coroner's office made a notification to next of kin. Bill's wife in Santa Maria, California was notified. He also had a son in Los Angeles.
I hate it for the family that has to even live through this because it's horrible. And truly, it is your worst nightmare.
Following her arrest, Omaima meets with multiple mental health professionals. Her story changes again and takes a shocking turn.
She was also able to provide gruesome details about the things that she did to her husband. Some of these details include dismembering her husband, boiling her husband, deep frying parts of his body.
She talked about cooking her husband, that his ribs tasted sweet. She put barbecue sauce on them and things of that nature.
That's strange. And not only strange, that is insane.
Investigators consider whether Omaima is telling the truth or setting up her defense.
It was really hard to believe that that happened. It really was.
Like one line, she was trying to say self-defense. The other line, she was trying to say criminal insanity.
It was obvious that she would throw things out and see what stuck.
Omaima's attorneys hire their own expert. In interviews, Dr. Nancy Kaiser-Boyd delves into Omaima's upbringing in Egypt.
She had a terrible childhood. She'd been sexually assaulted. Her father often beat her, and her stepmother there beat her also.
In addition to her stressful home environment, she lived in a culture during a time where female circumcision was very popular. And so this is something that she experienced very young, at 7 years old.
They took her to a dark place. She remembered it was 3 older women. Her mother wasn't there. She thought they were killing her. She described extraordinary pain and fear, and then she became unconscious. She didn't wake until her mother came and touched her. And by that time, she told me that they were preparing for her burial because they thought she was dead.
Omaima Nelson is behind bars, accused of brutally dismembering her husband of just a few weeks. In interviews with a psychologist, Omaima reveals she suffered sexual abuse, violence, and female circumcision.
We had her examined by a gynecologist, and that doctor told us that her vaginal area had a lot of scar tissue and that sex would be very painful for her.
During the trial prep, Omaima's defense team, her attorney and investigator, actually flew to this suburb of Cairo and did in-depth interviews of her family members and to kind of give a glimpse of her childhood growing up and possibly the abuses involved, to show that she'd had a series of dominating males in her life and that she'd experienced not only the circumcision but sexual assault. And so there was definitely some aspects of her past that they were trying to show contributed to this murder.
Detectives and prosecutors prepare to counter whatever defense Omaima brings to court. They speak with medical professionals who examined Omaima on the day of her arrest.
The hospital report concluded that there were no signs of rape or sexual assault.
She also mentioned that she was the one who had been held down and tied to this bedpost. No ligature marks at all around her wrists or her ankles. In fact, medical professionals said she had cuts on her, cuts that came from when she was stabbing Bill.
Investigators reach out to Bill's family, including his ex-wives.
Bill was very acquainted with family and his children. His kids would call him on a fairly regular basis, and yeah, he was just a great dad.
When I spoke to Bill's ex-wife, she spoke very fondly of Bill. And I was struck at one point that she really liked this guy. And she was deeply hurt by what happened to him.
In talking to the family, it was obvious that Bill Nelson was not a violent person. No evidence of that.
Investigators find no record of violence or abuse on Bill's behalf. Omaima is a different story.
One incident included her going to the pharmacy and grabbing whatever she wanted out of there and stealing without paying for this stuff. 2 security guards were watching her, and when they tried to stop her, she got extremely violent with them, so much so she ended up attacking them so viciously that she bit the chest of one of the women, the female security guards. She bit her breast so hard that she almost bit it off, and she also grabbed the vagina of the security guard as well.
As news of the gruesome crime spreads across the state, law enforcement gets a phone call.
Robert Hansen saw the news report of Omaima's crimes against Bill Nelson.
Mr. Robert Hansen, elderly, single, lived in an apartment, fairly successful business person. He met Omaima in a bar, and over conversation, one thing led to another, and she went home with him. Obviously, there was a relationship that started.
At one point during their relationship, they were having sex, and they were doing what she likes to call kinky sex.
She gets over there and ties him up, but instead of doing the kinky sexual thing that she promised, she attempted to rob him and pulls a gun on him. The defendant didn't tie the restraints tight enough because Robert was able to get free and escape from her. But he was so embarrassed that he never called the police. But once he saw the report in the news of Bill Nelson, he had to come forward. He couldn't keep silent because she had done something similar to him and he survived. So this wasn't Omaima's first rodeo.
Over a year after the grisly discovery of Bill Nelson's body, his wife, Omaima, is set to stand trial.
When the case goes to trial, December 1992, prosecutors immediately try to paint Omaima as this woman who wanted this lavish lifestyle that she was promised by Bill Nelson, and she was entitled to get this lifestyle.
Omaima Nelson was an ex-model, beautiful woman of Egyptian descent, very attractive, and she would seek out older men to fleece them for their money.
Bill was talking about being wealthy and owning a cattle ranch and having money, which fed right into what she was looking for. She was looking for another sugar daddy.
Following their whirlwind romance and wedding, a different truth emerged.
Things started to fall apart a little bit. She realized that Bill wasn't the man that he might be saying he is. He didn't have that cattle ranch. It became real to her that Bill had purported himself to be something other than he was.
The things that Bill promised her and the lifestyle that she thought she was going to live was all a lie. Bill didn't have any money, and she wanted payback.
On Thanksgiving Day, tensions were high, and Mr. Nelson found himself tied to a bed.
She immobilized him under a false pretext. Probably hit him with the iron. Several times, about 30 times. The iron broke during this assault. Lamp was used, also broken. And then he was stabbed too. And then started cutting him up.
From November 28th till December 1st, she completely destroyed her husband's body.
Next door neighbor, when he interviewed him, he said he was able to hear through their common wall chopping and the sink running and the garbage disposal running, to the point where he believed that the garbage disposal had given up. This activity went on through the early morning hours, quite prolonged.
Prosecutors also call Robert Hansen to the stand.
So Robert's story shows the defendant's modus operandi, and he became a star witness in the prosecution's case against her, showing that she had previously tried to do this to someone else.
Omima's attorneys do not attempt an insanity plea.
Her lawyer argued that this was self-defense or imperfect self-defense, which is a sudden belief that you need to defend yourself by killing the other person.
Dr. Kaiser Boyd takes the stand.
What she told me was that he had her tied to the bed, and he was sitting on top of her, and he was angry, and he had his pocket knife out, and he was cutting her on the breasts. And she, as you can imagine, cutting is a trigger for someone who's had genital circumcision, so she flipped out. And she got loose, and she started hitting him with a lamp by the bed. She jumped up and grabbed an iron that was in the room. And started beating him with that. She said he fell on the bed, and she stabbed him with scissors. She cut him up because she didn't want him to be able to enter the afterlife. The reason Egyptians wrapped their dead and mummified them was so they could enter heaven whole. She told me she hoped if she got to heaven, she would never see him there.
Omima took the stand herself to testify in this case. And she began to share with them in a very emotional, heartfelt testimony about, first of all, her life and the continuous abuse and the trauma and the pain.
She was a victim of sexual assault, of child abuse, of female genital mutilation, and all of this trauma, cumulatively over the years, contributed to her psychological stressors that caused her to do this.
The jury deliberates for 6 days.
I was on needles and pins. I didn't know what the outcome would be.
Ultimately, they came and found her guilty with second-degree murder, and she received 25 years to life.
But Omima's story doesn't end with the verdict.
While in prison, Omima meets another older gentleman that's rich. And that relationship began to flourish. They became married. However, during the marriage, her husband dies, but he also leaves her with a lot of money. And now she's up for parole in 2026, and she may get her dream to finally live the American dream.
The life that she lived was brutal, and it's very clear to me that it followed her everywhere that she went.
I understand her anger. However, it does not justify the gruesome, horrible, horrific crime that she committed. She doesn't deserve to be free. I don't think you can rehabilitate evil.
The house looked ordinary. It sat quietly on a peaceful suburban street in Unionville, Markham, where rows of carefully maintained homes stood beneath the cold November sky like silent witnesses. Warm porch lights glowed behind curtains. Fallen maple leaves collected along the sidewalks, damp from the evening air. Nothing about the neighborhood suggested that, within the walls of one particular house, a family was about to be destroyed from the inside. At approximately 10:30 p.m. on November 8th, 2010, the stillness shattered. A frantic voice reached the emergency dispatcher. "My parents. They've been shot. Please hurry. Please." The caller sounded terrified. She cried between broken breaths, struggling to finish her sentences. Every word painted the picture of a terrified daughter who had just survived a nightmare. Her name was Jennifer Pan. According to her account, armed men had forced their way into the family's home. They had tied her hands behind her back. They had marched her parents downstairs at gunpoint. She could only listen as gunshots echoed through the basement before the attackers disappeared into the darkness. It sounded like another tragic home invasion, the kind of crime that steals headlines for a few days before fading into memory. Police officers raced through the quiet streets, their emergency lights washing red and blue across driveways and brick walls. Ambulances arrived seconds later. Paramedics hurried toward the front door carrying trauma equipment, expecting chaos. Inside, chaos was waiting. The house was strangely calm. Furniture remained perfectly arranged. Family photographs still lined the hallway. Shoes were neatly placed near the entrance. The television was off. There were no overturned tables. No shattered windows. No obvious signs of a desperate struggle. Only silence. Then came the blood. In the basement lay Bitch Pan. She had been shot multiple times at close range. Her body rested exactly where she had fallen. The room carried the heavy metallic scent familiar to homicide investigators, a smell that never truly left their memories no matter how many crime scenes they visited. Nearby, Pan was barely alive. Bullets had torn through his body. Every breath was shallow. Every heartbeat was a battle against death itself. Paramedics worked with desperate urgency. There was no time to ask questions. No time to understand what had happened. Only time to keep one man alive. Upstairs, Jennifer waited. Her wrists appeared to have been tied. She was crying. Her voice trembled. She told officers that everything had happened so quickly. Several armed men had entered the house. They demanded money. They tied her up. They forced her to watch helplessly as they dragged her parents downstairs. She believed her mother was dead. She did not know whether her father would survive. Any detective arriving at that scene would have felt sympathy. A young woman had supposedly watched her family collapse before her eyes. She seemed traumatized. She answered questions. She cried often. She hugged herself against the cold November air as police escorted her outside beneath a blanket. Television cameras would later capture images of flashing lights surrounding the modest family home. Neighbors whispered behind police tape. Many knew the Pan family. They were quiet, hardworking, private. The parents were immigrants who had spent decades building a better future. The daughter had always seemed polite, talented, successful. Nothing appeared unusual. Nothing suggested that this family was living inside a carefully constructed illusion. Yet experienced investigators know something that most people do not. Crime scenes speak. Sometimes they speak loudly. Sometimes they whisper. This one whispered. One detective slowly walked through the living room. He noticed expensive electronics sitting untouched. Cash had not been scattered across the floor. Jewelry remained inside the house. If robbery had truly been the motive, why had so much been left behind? Another investigator examined the front entrance. There were no broken locks, no shattered glass, no damaged frame. If armed intruders had stormed inside, how had they entered so quietly? Questions began to appear before the victims had even reached the hospital. Small questions, harmless questions, the kind that experienced homicide investigators quietly collect before drawing any conclusions. Jennifer continued repeating the same basic story. Several men. A violent home invasion. Bound hands. Gunshots downstairs. Escape. Everything happened so fast. She could offer little more. It sounded believable. But believable stories are not always true. Across the city, doctors fought to save Han Pan. They removed bullets, controlled internal bleeding, stabilized fractures. Hour after hour, surgeons refused to give up. Nobody knew whether he would ever wake. If he died, investigators might never learn exactly what happened inside that basement. Meanwhile, officers secured every inch of the residence. Crime scene photographers documented every room from dozens of angles. Forensic specialists dusted surfaces for fingerprints. Each drop of blood, each footprint, each spent cartridge, each fiber, every tiny fragment became part of a puzzle whose final picture remained invisible. Outside, the November wind carried dead leaves across the driveway. Neighbors watched through their windows long after midnight. Some quietly prayed for the surviving father. Others wondered why anyone would target such an ordinary family. The Pan family had never appeared wealthy enough to attract violent criminals. They kept to themselves. They worked hard. They rarely caused problems. It simply made no sense. But murder rarely does. Behind the police tape, detectives began learning more about the family. Jennifer lived at home despite being 24 years old. Her parents were known for strict discipline. Friends described complicated family dynamics. There had been arguments. There had been pressure. Expectations. Control. Still, none of that explained bullets fired into two parents inside their own home. Not yet. Hundreds of kilometers away, people slept peacefully, unaware that one of Canada's most shocking criminal investigations had just begun. Within weeks, newspapers would carry Jennifer Pan's photograph across the country. Television networks would analyze every detail of her emergency call. Experts would debate motive. Psychologists would discuss deception. Investigators would spend thousands of hours reconstructing a single evening that lasted only minutes. But on that first night, no one, not the officers standing in the cold driveway, not the surgeons inside the operating room, not the reporters waiting beyond the barricades, could imagine where the evidence would ultimately lead. Because this was never simply a story about murder. It was a story about expectation, about secrets carefully protected for years, about lies told so often that they became indistinguishable from reality. It was the story of a daughter who had spent nearly a decade constructing a second life behind the one her parents believed they knew. And somewhere inside that invisible life, hidden beneath forged report cards, fake university acceptances, imaginary volunteer work, and carefully rehearsed conversations, something had begun to grow. Not anger alone. Not fear alone. Something darker. Something patient. Something that would eventually transform a quiet suburban home into one of the most unforgettable crime scenes in modern Canadian history. The truth, when it finally emerged, would seem almost impossible to believe. Because the greatest threat inside the Pan household had never forced its way through the front door. It had been living there all along. The Pan family did not look unusual from the outside. If anything, they appeared to embody the promise that had drawn millions of immigrants to Canada over the decades. A promise that hard work, sacrifice, and discipline could build a life far better than the one left behind. Their home stood in a quiet neighborhood in Unionville, Markham, one of the safest and most desirable communities in the Greater Toronto Area. Streets were lined with mature maple trees that turned brilliant shades of red and gold every autumn. Children rode bicycles in the afternoons. Families gathered for weekend barbecues during the summer months. Holiday lights decorated front porches every December. It was the kind of neighborhood where neighbors waved politely before disappearing into their own carefully organized lives. Nothing about the Pan family's home suggested violence. Inside, every room reflected order. Shoes were arranged neatly by the entrance. Furniture remained spotless. Family photographs occupied shelves and walls, freezing moments of birthdays, graduations, vacations, and smiling faces. A polished piano stood as a reminder of years of practice and parental investment. Certificates and awards decorated parts of the house, silently telling visitors that achievement mattered here. To outsiders, it looked like the home of a successful family that valued education, discipline, and respect. But appearances often conceal realities that even close friends fail to notice. Long before the night of November 8, 2010, another story had been unfolding inside those walls. It began decades earlier. Han Pan and Bich Ha Pan had left Vietnam with little more than hope and determination. Like many immigrants arriving in Canada after the Vietnam War, they believed opportunity could be earned through relentless effort. Their early years were marked by exhausting factory shifts, financial uncertainty, and constant sacrifice. Every paycheck represented another small step toward stability. Every overtime shift meant another chance to save for a better future. Neither of them had grown up with wealth or privilege. They understood what it meant to struggle. Perhaps because of that, they wanted something very different for their children. Education became their highest priority. Academic success was not simply encouraged. It became the foundation upon which every future dream rested. Good grades meant security. Professional careers meant freedom from the hardships they had endured. Failure, on the other hand, carried frightening consequences. To them, poor academic performance did not merely represent disappointing marks on a report card. It threatened everything they had worked to build. Their daughter, Jennifer, was born into that vision. From an early age, she appeared bright and talented. She learned piano while other children spent afternoons playing outside. She practiced figure skating before school and after school. Music lessons, extracurricular activities, homework, competitions. Her childhood followed a carefully structured schedule designed to maximize every opportunity. There was little room for idleness. Little room for rebellion. Little room for mistakes. Friends later described Jennifer as polite, soft-spoken, and eager to please. Teachers remembered a student who rarely caused trouble. Neighbors saw a respectful young woman helping around the house or leaving with books under her arm. To anyone observing from a distance, she looked like the daughter every parent hoped to raise. Yet appearances can be deceptive. Children raised under immense expectations often become experts at hiding disappointment. Jennifer desperately wanted her parents' approval. She also feared losing it. That fear would eventually become one of the most powerful forces shaping her life. As she entered high school, the academic demands became more intense. Advanced science courses, mathematics, university preparation. The path toward becoming a pharmacist or another respected professional seemed clearly defined by her parents long before Jennifer fully understood what she wanted for herself. She tried to keep pace. Sometimes she succeeded. Sometimes she did not. Behind every successful report card came anxiety about the next one. Behind every compliment waited another expectation. Success was never the destination. It was merely the minimum requirement. When Jennifer struggled academically, she experienced something she had rarely encountered before. Failure. A failed course might appear insignificant to many families. Students recover. They retake classes. They change career paths. Life moves forward. Inside the Pan household, failure felt much larger. Jennifer understood exactly what disappointing her parents meant, or at least what she believed it meant. Instead of admitting her difficulties, she chose another path. One lie. It seemed harmless at first, small enough to erase later. She told her parents that everything was fine. Then another lie became necessary to support the first. When questions became more detailed, her answers became more elaborate. Before long, Jennifer found herself living inside two completely different realities. One existed outside the house. The other existed inside it. Outside, she struggled academically and no longer followed the educational path her parents imagined. Inside, she remained the perfect daughter. She claimed she had been accepted into university. She spoke about classes she never attended. She discussed professors who had never met her. She described laboratory work that never existed. She invented volunteer shifts at hospitals. She fabricated schedules, assignments, examinations, and future plans with astonishing precision. Every morning, she left home carrying books. Sometimes she spent hours in libraries. Sometimes she visited friends. Sometimes she simply wandered through shopping centers or cafes, waiting until it was time to return home. Every evening, she described an entirely fictional day. Her parents listened proudly. They believed every word. The deception continued for years. Maintaining that illusion required extraordinary effort. Jennifer forged report cards, created fake university documents, printed fabricated acceptance letters, constructed convincing explanations whenever inconsistencies appeared. Each successful deception provided temporary relief while simultaneously creating even greater pressure. Because lies possess a dangerous characteristic. They demand maintenance. Every invented detail eventually requires another invented detail. Every false achievement requires another imaginary success. Jennifer became trapped inside the identity she had created. Escaping meant confessing years of deception. Continuing meant sinking even deeper. Meanwhile, another part of her life remained hidden. She had begun a relationship with Daniel Wong. To Jennifer, Danny represented freedom. With him, she experienced conversations unconstrained by parental expectations. She imagined a future defined by her own choices instead of carefully prescribed obligations. He became someone she trusted, someone she believed understood her frustrations. Her parents viewed the relationship very differently. They disapproved. Strongly. Their objections reflected not only concerns about Danny himself, but also their broader belief that romantic relationships distracted young adults from educational achievement. Arguments followed. Restrictions increased. Jennifer's independence diminished even further. Eventually, her parents discovered additional inconsistencies surrounding her education. The carefully constructed illusion began to crack. Questions became sharper. Trust disappeared. The household atmosphere changed. Jennifer was no longer permitted to come and go freely. Her parents monitored her movements. Cell phone use became restricted. Visits outside the home required permission. She was expected to leave only for approved activities, including piano lessons. To Jennifer, adulthood suddenly felt indistinguishable from imprisonment. To Han and Bitch, these measures represented responsible parenting intended to guide their daughter back toward success. Neither side fully understood the other. Communication gradually gave way to suspicion. Silence replaced honest conversation. Inside that comfortable suburban house, family dinners grew quieter. Conversations became cautious. Every interaction carried invisible tension. No neighbors could hear it. No friends truly recognized it. From the street, the Pan residence still looked peaceful beneath neatly trimmed hedges and glowing porch lights. Yet beneath that ordinary roof existed two competing versions of reality. The parents believed they were correcting a daughter who had temporarily lost her way. Jennifer believed she was losing control over every aspect of her own life. Both perspectives contained elements of truth. Neither could foresee how disastrously those truths would collide. Years of pressure had created resentment. Years of deception had created fear. Years of avoiding honest conversations had transformed misunderstandings into emotional walls that seemed impossible to climb. Still, countless families experience conflict. Countless parents argue with their children. Countless young adults feel misunderstood. Almost none of those stories end in murder. That is what makes the Pan case so haunting. The tragedy did not emerge from a single explosive argument or one catastrophic decision made overnight. It developed gradually, almost invisibly, through thousands of ordinary moments. A disappointed glance. A concealed report card. A fabricated story. An unanswered question. A relationship kept secret. A fear left unspoken. Piece by piece, year after year, the distance between parents and daughter widened until they were no longer living in the same emotional world, even while sharing the same address. By the autumn of 2010, the foundation of the family's carefully maintained image had become dangerously unstable. The lies had grown too large to sustain. The expectations remained impossibly high. Jennifer stood at a crossroads where every possible path seemed to lead toward consequences she feared she could not bear. She could confess everything and watch the life her parents believed in collapse before their eyes. Or she could continue searching for another escape. In the weeks ahead, that search would lead her toward people willing to solve problems with violence. And once that door opened, it would never close again. Every tragedy has victims. Sometimes they are remembered only by the way they died. Their names become headlines. Their photographs appear beside police tape and courtroom sketches. Their lives are compressed into a few paragraphs describing occupations, ages, and the circumstances of their deaths. Everything they loved, everything they sacrificed, everything that made them human slowly disappears behind the crime itself. But before the Pan family became the center of one of Canada's most shocking criminal investigations, they were simply a family trying to build a better life. To understand what happened inside that house on November 8, 2010, it is necessary to understand not only Jennifer Pan, but also the two people who spent decades believing every sacrifice they made was an investment in their daughter's future. Han Pan had never expected life to be easy. Born in Vietnam, He grew up during years of political instability and uncertainty. Like countless others, he dreamed of finding security somewhere beyond the hardships of his homeland. When he eventually settled in Canada, he arrived with little money and no guarantee that life would improve. Everything he achieved afterward came through persistence rather than luck. Factory work was demanding. The hours were long. The pay was modest. The physical exhaustion became routine. But Han accepted every challenge because he believed that temporary hardship could create permanent opportunity for his family. His wife, Bitcha Pan, shared the same determination. Quiet and hardworking, she carried herself with gentle patience that friends and relatives often remembered years later. She also worked long shifts, helping to support the household while raising 2 children. Like her husband, she understood sacrifice not as something extraordinary but simply as part of everyday life. Together they represented a generation of immigrant parents whose greatest dream was never wealth for themselves. It was possibility for their children. Every paycheck disappeared into practical necessities. Mortgage payments, school supplies, music lessons, sports equipment, educational opportunities. Vacations were rare. Luxury was almost non-existent. Their priorities remained simple. Work today. Save tomorrow. Give the children every opportunity that had once seemed impossible. Jennifer became the center of those hopes. She was their first child. From the beginning, they encouraged discipline and achievement. Birthdays and holidays brought gifts that reflected learning rather than indulgence. Books, educational games, musical instruments, and structured activities became normal parts of childhood. Success was celebrated, not with extravagant rewards, but with quiet pride. Neighbors saw a family that appeared remarkably close. Jennifer practiced piano almost every day. Sometimes the music drifted through open windows during warm summer evenings. Classical pieces echoed softly into the neighborhood, while children played basketball in nearby driveways. Parents walking their dogs occasionally paused for a moment, listening before continuing down the sidewalk. Inside the house, Han often believed those hours of practice represented something much larger than music. Discipline, commitment, preparation for adulthood. Jennifer also devoted years to figure skating. Early mornings began before sunrise. Competitions required endless practice. Falls were common. Bruises became familiar. But perseverance mattered more than comfort. Her parents drove her to training sessions regardless of weather. Snowstorms, freezing rain, icy roads. None of it changed the routine. Looking back years later, those mornings would seem almost symbolic. 2 parents sacrificing sleep, money, and energy because they believed unwavering support would give their daughter every possible advantage. To outside observers, Jennifer appeared talented. Teachers described her as respectful. She rarely disrupted class. She smiled politely. She completed assignments. She seemed like the kind of student who blended naturally into the background rather than demanding attention. She had friends, although not many close ones. Those who knew her often described someone careful with words, someone who seemed uncomfortable disappointing others. Perhaps that trait developed long before anyone realized. Children quickly learn what earns approval. Some become rebellious. Others become perfectionists. Jennifer appeared determined to satisfy expectations, even when doing so became increasingly difficult. As she entered adolescence, life naturally became more complicated. Academic subjects demanded greater effort. Friendships evolved. Personal identity became more important. Dreams began changing. Yet inside the Pan household, the expectations remained remarkably consistent. Education came first. Always. Professional success was never presented as one possibility among many. It was the destination. Medicine, pharmacy, engineering, dentistry, careers that promised stability and respect. Anything less felt like settling. Neither Han nor Bitch intended cruelty. They genuinely believed they were protecting their daughter's future. Everything they demanded came from love as they understood it. Unfortunately, love expressed through relentless expectation can sometimes feel indistinguishable from pressure. Jennifer rarely challenged her parents openly. Instead, she learned another strategy. Agreement, compliance, silence. If disagreement created conflict, avoiding disagreement seemed easier. If honesty risked disappointment, perhaps dishonesty felt safer. Those habits developed slowly. No single moment transformed Jennifer into someone capable of living a double life. Instead, countless small decisions accumulated over years. One concealed grade. One omitted conversation. One exaggerated achievement. Each decision appeared temporary. Each promised to prevent immediate conflict. Yet every temporary solution quietly expanded into something larger. Meanwhile, Hen continued believing everything was proceeding according to plan. He proudly spoke about Jennifer's future. Relatives heard stories about university ambitions. Friends admired the family's commitment to education. Success appeared inevitable. Only Jennifer knew how fragile that illusion truly was. Bitch occupied a different role within the household. Compared with Han, she often appeared gentler, less outspoken, more likely to comfort than confront. Yet she also supported the family's expectations. She trusted her husband. She trusted their daughter. She believed honesty existed inside their home because honesty formed the foundation of their own marriage. When Jennifer smiled and described another successful semester, Bitch believed her. When Jennifer mentioned volunteer work at hospitals, Bitch felt proud. When Jennifer discussed future professional plans, her mother imagined the day those dreams would become reality. There was no reason not to believe. Parents naturally trust their children, especially children who have spent years appearing responsible. One of the greatest tragedies of this case lies in that trust. Trust became the very thing that allowed deception to flourish. Years passed. Jennifer grew older. Most young adults gradually experience increasing independence. University life introduces new friendships, part-time jobs, romantic relationships, financial responsibility, personal freedom. Jennifer experienced almost none of those milestones in the way her parents imagined. Instead, every day required maintaining an increasingly complicated performance. She left home carrying backpacks filled with books she did not need. She invented class schedules. She memorized imaginary professors' names. She fabricated examination dates. Returning home each evening required another carefully rehearsed conversation. Her parents asked ordinary questions. How was class today? What did your professor say? How did your exam go? Jennifer answered effortlessly. Practice had made deception almost automatic. Ironically, maintaining those lies demanded remarkable intelligence. Remembering fabricated details over several years required extraordinary organization. She kept calendars, created documents, forged transcripts, printed official-looking paperwork, constructed an entire fictional academic career with astonishing consistency. Every successful lie postponed disaster. Every postponed disaster increased the consequences of eventual discovery. Psychologists who later studied the case noted how prolonged deception often creates its own psychological prison. Eventually, the liar no longer acts solely to fool others. They continue lying because truth itself becomes unbearable. Jennifer seemed trapped inside exactly that cycle. Confession no longer meant admitting one failed class. It meant revealing years of deception, destroying her parents' trust, shattering the image they held of both her and themselves. Perhaps she feared they would never forgive her. Perhaps she feared losing their love altogether. No one can know every thought that passed through her mind. What investigators could establish was this. The lies continued. The pressure intensified. And the emotional distance separating parents and daughter widened almost invisibly. Inside the Pan home, 3 people occupied the same rooms each evening. Yet each believed they were living in a different reality. Han believed he was guiding his daughter toward success. Bitch believed her family remained united despite occasional disagreements. Jennifer believed she was one mistake away from losing everything. All 3 loved one another in their own ways. All 3 misunderstood one another more deeply than any of them realized. That heartbreaking combination, love without understanding, would become one of the defining themes of the Pan family story. And before long, another relationship would enter Jennifer's life, offering what appeared to be an escape from the invisible prison she believed surrounded her. She would meet someone who listened without judgment, someone who represented freedom rather than expectation, someone whose presence would change the course of every life connected to the Pan family forever. There are nights that disappear into memory almost as soon as they end. And then there are nights that divide lives into 2 chapters. Everything before, everything after. November 8th, 2010, began like countless other Mondays in the Pan household. The late autumn sun climbed slowly above the rooftops of Unionville, casting long shadows across quiet streets where commuters hurried toward Toronto and children waited for school buses wrapped in heavy coats. The air carried the unmistakable chill of approaching winter. Trees that had been brilliant with orange and crimson only weeks earlier now stood nearly bare, their branches scratching softly against gray skies as cold winds swept through the neighborhood. Inside the Pan home, routine still governed the day. Routine had always been the family's language. Breakfast was quiet. Everyone knew where they needed to be. Everyone followed familiar schedules. Nothing appeared unusual to anyone looking from the outside. Han Pan prepared for another day of work with the discipline that had shaped his entire adult life. Years of factory shifts had conditioned his body to rise early, regardless of exhaustion. He rarely complained. Hard work had become so deeply woven into his identity that rest often felt undeserved. Bitch Ha Pan moved calmly through the kitchen, finishing small household tasks before beginning her own responsibilities. She had spent decades repeating similar mornings, caring for the family while balancing long hours outside the home. Even ordinary routines reflected years of quiet devotion. Jennifer also followed the rhythm expected of her. At least, that was how it appeared. To her parents, she remained their daughter, someone rebuilding trust after previous disappointments, someone whose life they believed they could still guide toward the future they had imagined for her. But beneath that ordinary routine, another reality existed. While Han and Bitch focused on work and responsibilities, Jennifer carried something invisible through every hour of the day. A secret. Not the secret she had been protecting for years. Something far more dangerous. By this point, investigators would later determine, the conspiracy had already moved beyond imagination. Phone calls had been made. Messages exchanged. People had been contacted. Money had been discussed. The impossible had slowly become a plan. No one inside the Pan household could hear that invisible countdown moving closer with every passing hour. The day unfolded quietly. Neighbors later struggled to remember anything unusual. No loud arguments. No suspicious vehicles parked outside. No obvious warning that violence was approaching. It was simply another Monday. And perhaps that ordinary quality makes the story even more haunting. Extraordinary tragedies often arrive disguised as ordinary days. As evening approached, temperatures dropped quickly. The neighborhood settled into familiar patterns. Garage doors opened and closed. Families returned home from work. Kitchen lights flickered on one house after another. Televisions filled living rooms with background noise. Children finished homework. Dogs barked somewhere in the distance before silence returned. Inside the Pan residence, dinner came and went. No surviving witness could fully reconstruct every conversation shared around the table that evening. Perhaps they discussed work. Perhaps they discussed family plans. Perhaps they talked about nothing particularly important. What makes hindsight so painful is knowing that countless ordinary moments become precious only after they are gone. At some point that night, Bitch Ha Pan unknowingly experienced the final ordinary evening of her life. She could not have known it. She could not have imagined that every routine she had repeated for years was quietly coming to an end. Somewhere else, several men prepared to carry out the agreement they had accepted. Unlike television dramas, there was nothing glamorous about what they intended to do. No elaborate disguises. No cinematic speeches. Just violence arranged for money. Investigators would later establish that approximately $10,000 had been promised for the murders. To those involved, human life had acquired a price. A number discussed during conversations that reduced parents to targets. As darkness covered Markham, the streets emptied. Streetlights reflected faintly on damp pavement. The Pan family remained inside. Safe. Or so they believed. The attackers approached the house carefully. There was no need to smash windows. No need to force lock doors. According to the evidence presented during the investigation, entry into the home was made through an unlocked door, allowing the men to enter quietly without attracting attention. The silence inside the house worked in their favor. Footsteps moved cautiously across familiar floors. Every second mattered. Every unnecessary sound risked alerting neighbors. The plan depended on speed. Inside, the family had almost no warning. What happened next unfolded in only a matter of minutes. Minutes that investigators would spend years reconstructing. The intruders quickly took control of the house. Weapons appeared. Commands were shouted. Fear replaced the quiet routine that had existed only moments earlier. Han Pan suddenly found himself staring down the barrel of a gun. Everything he had spent decades building, his home, his family, his sense of security, collapsed in an instant. Years of discipline offered no preparation for this moment. He complied. There was little choice. Resistance could mean immediate death. Nearby, Bitch faced the same terror. She had spent her adult life protecting her family from hardship. Now there was nothing she could do. The attackers controlled every movement, every decision, every breath inside the house. Jennifer was present. According to the account she would initially provide investigators, she had been bound by the intruders and forced to watch helplessly as events unfolded. She would later describe overwhelming fear, panic, confusion. She claimed she believed everyone inside the house was about to die. At that moment, responding officers had no reason to question her story. It sounded exactly like the reaction expected from a traumatized survivor. Meanwhile, Han and Bitch were forced downstairs toward the basement. For Han, each step must have carried unbearable uncertainty. He had no idea whether he would survive the next minute. He had no idea whether his wife or daughter remained alive upstairs. He only knew armed strangers controlled his fate. The basement was quiet. Cold concrete floors absorbed every sound. Shadows gathered in the corners where the light barely reached. It was a room designed for storage and ordinary household tasks. Within moments, it became a place of unimaginable violence. The gunfire shattered the silence. One shot, then another, then more. The echoes slammed against the basement walls before fading into a terrible stillness. Bitch Ha Pan collapsed. Her injuries were catastrophic. There would be no opportunity for goodbye. No final conversation. No chance to tell her family she loved them one last time. Her life ended inside the home she had spent decades helping to build. Nearby, Han Pan was also shot multiple times. Bullets tore through his body with devastating force. Pain overwhelmed every thought. He collapsed beside his wife. Blood spread rapidly across the floor beneath them. For many victims, those moments would have been the end. But Han refused to surrender. Somewhere beneath unbearable pain, instinct continued fighting. Every breath became work. Every heartbeat became resistance. He remained conscious just long enough to understand something that would later change the entire investigation. As he struggled to stay alive, he observed details that did not fit the story investigators would initially hear. Those observations, fragmented though they were, would become some of the most important evidence in one of Canada's most remarkable homicide investigations. Upstairs, the attackers prepared to leave. The entire assault had lasted only minutes. Violence rarely lasts as long as memory suggests. Lives can be destroyed with terrifying speed. Outside, the neighborhood remained almost perfectly still. Most residents heard nothing. Those who may have noticed unfamiliar sounds had little reason to imagine murder unfolding only a few houses away. The attackers disappeared into the darkness. Behind them, the Pan residents fell silent once again. A silence very different from the one that had existed earlier that evening. This silence belonged to death, to blood, to unanswered questions, to a family that had been permanently changed. Within moments, Jennifer reached for a telephone. The next voice to enter the story would not belong to a family member. It would belong to a 911 dispatcher. And that desperate phone call, filled with panic, tears, and pleas for help, would soon become one of the most carefully analyzed recordings in Canadian criminal history. The first police cruisers arrived within minutes. Their emergency lights painted the quiet street in alternating flashes of red and blue, reflecting across parked cars, bedroom windows, and rain-darkened pavement. The neighborhood, usually silent by that hour, slowly awakened as curtains shifted and front doors cracked open. Curious neighbors stepped onto porches wearing sweaters and slippers, trying to understand why so many emergency vehicles had suddenly descended upon one of the safest streets in Markham. For the officers, there was no time to speculate. Every second mattered. The radio dispatch had reported an armed home invasion. Multiple gunshot victims. Possible fatalities. As the officers approached the front door, years of training immediately took over. Weapons drawn. Eyes scanning every shadow. Every window. Every possible escape route. No one knew whether the gunmen were still inside. The front door stood partially open. One officer announced himself loudly before entering. No response. Only silence. The silence felt unnatural. Homes are rarely this quiet. Even empty houses produce familiar sounds. The gentle hum of a refrigerator, the distant ticking of a clock, the creak of heating vents adjusting to the cold November night. This house felt different. Heavy. Almost as if the walls themselves had absorbed the violence that had unfolded only minutes earlier. The officers cleared the main floor room by room. Kitchen. Dining room. Living room. Everything appeared strangely orderly. Nothing looked like the aftermath of a desperate robbery. Family photographs still rested perfectly on shelves. A decorative bowl remained untouched on the dining table. A laptop sat where someone had left it earlier that day. Televisions. Electronics. Jewelry. Nothing appeared to have been hastily collected by fleeing criminals. One officer quietly noticed the contradiction. Home invasions motivated by theft usually leave visible disorder. Drawers emptied. Closets searched. Cabinets opened. Furniture overturned. Yet the Pan residence looked almost untouched. Except for one thing. Blood. Following faint traces toward the basement, the officers descended the stairs. Each step revealed more evidence of unimaginable violence. Then they found them. Bitch Ha Pan lay motionless on the concrete floor. There was no immediate uncertainty. Years of experience allowed officers to recognize fatal injuries almost instantly. Even before paramedics confirmed it, many understood that she was beyond saving. Nearby, Han Pan was still alive. Barely. His breathing was shallow and irregular. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the concrete floor. Despite multiple gunshot wounds, he clung to consciousness through sheer determination. Paramedics rushed downstairs carrying trauma equipment. The basement instantly transformed into controlled chaos. Medical commands echoed through the room. Blood pressure. Pulse. Airway. Intravenous lines. Every procedure happened with astonishing speed. One paramedic applied pressure to a wound while another prepared oxygen. A third attempted to stabilize Han for transport. No one spoke about survival. Everyone simply focused on giving him a chance. As Han drifted between consciousness and darkness, fragmented images passed through his mind. His wife. The gunshots. The faces inside his home. His daughter. He wanted to speak. Wanted to explain something. But pain overwhelmed every attempt. The ambulance doors closed only minutes later. Sirens pierced the night once again as emergency crews raced toward the nearest trauma center. Behind them, the homicide investigation officially began. Back inside the house, Jennifer remained upstairs. She appeared emotionally devastated. Wrapped in a blanket provided by emergency responders, she sat trembling while officers asked basic questions. Her breathing remained uneven. Her voice frequently broke into tears. She explained that several armed men had entered the home. They demanded money. They tied her hands. They forced her parents downstairs. She heard gunshots. She believed the attackers intended to kill everyone. She insisted she had been helpless. To the officers conducting those initial interviews, nothing seemed obviously impossible. Victims often struggle to remember traumatic events accurately. Fear affects memory. Shock affects perception. Small inconsistencies during the first hours after violent crimes are remarkably common. No one expected Jennifer to provide perfect answers. Still, experienced investigators rarely ignore first impressions. One detective quietly observed Jennifer's restraints. The bindings appeared unusual. They seemed loose, almost carefully positioned. Not impossible. Just different. He said nothing. Not yet. Years of homicide work had taught him an important lesson. Never allow first impressions to become conclusions. Observe. Record. Verify. The truth usually reveals itself slowly. Outside, crime scene tape surrounded the property. Additional officers established a security perimeter. Neighbors gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed voices despite the cold. Some recognized the ambulance transporting Han Pan. Others asked whether the family had survived. Rumors began spreading almost immediately. A robbery. A gang attack. A targeted shooting. No one knew. Television news helicopters had not yet arrived, but local reporters were already monitoring police radio traffic. By sunrise, the quiet suburban street would become national news. Inside the residence, forensic specialists carefully documented every inch of the scene. Crime scene photography came first. Hundreds of images. Wide angles. Close-ups. Every room. Every hallway. Every bullet hole. every drop of blood. Nothing could be overlooked because once a crime scene changes, it can never truly be recreated. After photography came measurement. Laser devices mapped the interior. Investigators recorded exact distances between evidence. The position of shell casings. Bloodstain patterns. Furniture placement. Doors. Windows. Every detail might eventually answer questions no witness could. One investigator focused exclusively on points of entry. The front door. Back door. Garage entrance. Ground floor windows. Surprisingly, none showed obvious signs of forced entry. Locks remained intact. Window glass was undamaged. Door frames showed no fresh splintering. Again, not impossible. Victims sometimes open doors voluntarily. Attackers sometimes exploit unlocked entrances. But each observation quietly weakened the appearance of a random home invasion. Another team processed fingerprints. Every smooth surface became a source of potential evidence. Light switches. Door handles. Countertops. Furniture. Investigators understood they would recover countless prints belonging to family members. The challenge lay in identifying anyone who should not have been there. Meanwhile, forensic specialists collected spent shell casings from the basement floor. Each casing carried microscopic markings unique to the firearm that discharged it. Ballistics experts would later compare those markings against recovered weapons, attempting to reconstruct exactly what happened during those horrifying minutes. Blood pattern analysts examined the walls and floor with extraordinary precision. The direction of blood spatter, the height of impact, the movement of victims after injury. Violent crime leaves behind physical stories invisible to untrained eyes. Blood does not lie. Gravity does not lie. Physics does not lie. Investigators simply needed patience to understand what those silent witnesses were saying. Hours passed. The November night gradually surrendered to dawn. Outside, frost formed across lawns and parked vehicles. Inside, detectives continued moving slowly through the home. One observation continued troubling several members of the investigative team. The valuables. Expensive electronics remained untouched. Jewelry appeared undisturbed. Cash had not disappeared. Even family vehicles remained parked outside. If robbery had truly motivated the attackers, why had they ignored so many obvious opportunities? Perhaps they had panicked. Perhaps something interrupted them. Or perhaps robbery had never been the real objective. At the hospital, surgeons continued fighting for Hanpan's life. His injuries were catastrophic. Every passing hour increased concern that he might never regain consciousness. Detectives understood the significance. If Han died, Jennifer could become the only surviving eyewitness. The investigation would rely heavily upon her version of events. If he survived, everything might change. Back at police headquarters, investigators began reconstructing Jennifer's timeline. Standard procedure required verifying every aspect of a witness's account. Phone records, financial activity, daily movements, family history, friends, employment, relationships. At first, these inquiries represented routine investigative work. No one had formally labeled Jennifer a suspect. She remained the surviving daughter of 2 shooting victims. But experienced homicide investigators understand another fundamental principle. Everyone connected to a violent death must be examined objectively. Family members, friends, neighbors, co-workers, no exceptions. Emotion cannot replace evidence. As dawn illuminated the quiet streets outside the Pan residence, detectives stood inside a home that appeared increasingly contradictory. A brutal double shooting, yet almost no signs of struggle. A reported robbery, yet valuables untouched. A surviving witness, yet subtle inconsistencies already beginning to emerge. Individually, none of these facts proved deception. Together, they formed questions. Questions that would quietly guide one of Canada's most meticulous homicide investigations. For now, however, detectives possessed more uncertainty than answers. The killers had vanished. One victim was dead. Another hovered between life and death. And the only person claiming to have witnessed everything remained, at least officially, another victim. No one inside that investigation could yet imagine that the greatest breakthrough would not come from fingerprints, DNA, or ballistic evidence. It would come from a father who refused to die. By the second day, the investigation had settled into a rhythm familiar to experienced homicide detectives. The flashing lights were gone. Television cameras had been pushed behind police barriers. The immediate chaos surrounding the crime scene had given way to something quieter, slower, and infinitely more dangerous for anyone hiding the truth. Methodical investigation. Unlike dramatic portrayals on television, homicide cases are rarely solved by sudden flashes of inspiration. They are built piece by piece, hour after hour, through thousands of small observations that gradually eliminate coincidence until only one explanation remains. The Pan case would prove no different. At York Regional Police Headquarters, detectives covered entire walls with photographs from the crime scene. Images of the basement. Images of shell casings. Images of the living room. The staircase. The front entrance. Jennifer. Hun. Bitch. Each photograph represented a question waiting to be answered. Detective teams divided responsibilities. One group focused entirely on forensic evidence. Another reconstructed the family's timeline. Others interviewed neighbors, friends, co-workers, relatives, and anyone who might have encountered the Pan family during the weeks leading up to the shooting. No detail was considered too small. A forgotten phone call. A canceled appointment. An unfamiliar vehicle. A passing conversation. Investigators understood that seemingly insignificant facts often become critical months later. The first interviews with neighbors produced surprisingly little. Most described the Pans in nearly identical terms. Quiet, hardworking, private, respectful. Few recalled arguments loud enough to attract attention. Few remembered visitors arriving regularly. Several admitted they barely knew the family despite living nearby for years. That in itself was not unusual. Suburban neighborhoods often function this way. People wave politely, exchange greetings, then disappear behind closed doors. Detectives next examined the possibility of random violence. Could the Pan family have been selected by chance? Was the neighborhood experiencing a pattern of home invasions? Recent police reports offered little support. Although isolated robberies had occurred elsewhere in the Greater Toronto Area, none closely resembled the brutality displayed inside the Pan residence. Professional robbery crews generally acted quickly. They wanted valuables, cash, jewelry, electronics, vehicles. Murder complicated everything. Killing victims transformed property crime into a major homicide investigation, dramatically increasing police resources and public attention. Experienced criminals usually avoided unnecessary violence for precisely that reason. Yet here, expensive property remained untouched. Instead, the attackers focused almost entirely on Han and Bitch. It appeared less like robbery, more like purpose. Meanwhile, forensic laboratories began processing evidence recovered from the scene. Shell casings entered ballistic analysis. Fingerprints moved through national databases. DNA samples underwent examination. Digital specialists extracted information from electronic devices. Every process required patience. Modern forensic science rarely produces instant answers. Television has created unrealistic expectations. Real investigations unfold over weeks and months, sometimes years. Jennifer remained deeply involved in those early investigative stages. Detectives interviewed her repeatedly. Initially, the conversations remained supportive. She was, after all, the surviving daughter. Officers understood trauma affects memory. Victims frequently remember events out of sequence. Small inconsistencies rarely indicate deception. They simply reflect human psychology under extreme stress. Jennifer described several armed intruders. She estimated there had been multiple men. They demanded money. They tied her hands, forced her parents downstairs. She heard gunshots. Afterward, the men fled. Each interview covered similar ground. But experienced investigators always compare separate interviews carefully, not searching for dramatic contradictions, searching for subtle evolution. Certain details within Jennifer's story shifted. The sequence of events became slightly different. Descriptions changed. Some memories grew more specific while others became strangely uncertain. Again, none of those changes independently proved dishonesty. Yet detectives quietly noted each one. Patterns matter, especially when multiple interviews begin diverging. One detective replayed the recorded emergency call several times. The voice sounded frightened. The emotion seemed genuine. Yet something about the pacing attracted attention. Not enough to draw conclusions. Only enough to justify further examination. Emergency calls often reveal details speakers later forget. Words spoken during panic carry unique evidentiary value. Investigators transcribed every sentence, every pause, every breath. Language experts later examined the recording alongside interview statements, searching for consistency. While Jennifer remained under careful observation, detectives widened the investigation into her personal life. Routine background inquiries produced unexpected information. Friends described Jennifer as intelligent but heavily controlled by her parents. Several mentioned strict household rules unusual for someone in her 20s. She reportedly required permission to leave home. Her parents monitored her schedule closely. Romantic relationships had created conflict. The portrait emerging differed significantly from the peaceful family image neighbors remembered. One friend quietly mentioned Daniel Wong. The name appeared almost casually during conversation. Jennifer's boyfriend. Detectives took note. Relationships always deserve attention in homicide investigations. Not because partners are automatically suspects, because they often possess valuable information about family dynamics invisible to outsiders. Investigators requested interviews with Danny. They wanted context. Nothing more. At least initially. Danny described Jennifer as frustrated by constant parental control. According to his account, she wanted greater independence. She often spoke about feeling trapped. Again, nothing extraordinary. Many young adults experience conflict with parents. Very few conflicts escalate toward murder. Still, detectives carefully documented every statement. As days passed, investigators built increasingly detailed timelines. Jennifer's phone records attracted particular interest. Every incoming call, every outgoing call, every text message. Cell towers quietly recorded movement across the city with remarkable precision. Technology often remembers what people forget, or choose not to remember. Digital forensic specialists downloaded months of communication data. Thousands of messages. Hundreds of calls. Most proved completely ordinary. Conversations with friends. Family contacts. Daily routines. Yet hidden among ordinary communication were exchanges that investigators found difficult to ignore. Some conversations appeared deliberately vague. Certain phone numbers belonged to individuals already known to police. Others connected indirectly through mutual acquaintances involved in criminal activity. Individually, each contact meant little. Collectively, they began forming a network detectives had not expected. Meanwhile, detectives revisited the physical evidence inside the house. Bloodstain analysts completed preliminary reports. Trajectory analysis reconstructed bullet paths. Crime scene reconstruction suggested victims had been controlled before the shooting. Again, the evidence emphasized execution rather than robbery. The valuables continued bothering investigators. They returned repeatedly to photographs showing untouched electronics, expensive watches, personal belongings. If armed men risked entering an occupied house, why ignore property worth thousands of dollars? One detective proposed an uncomfortable possibility. What if theft wasn't the reason they came? The room fell silent. No one answered immediately. Because if robbery had merely been a disguise, then someone wanted investigators to believe a false story. And if someone deliberately staged the crime scene, who benefited most? Detectives resisted jumping toward conclusions. Confirmation bias destroys investigations. Evidence must lead investigators. Investigators must never lead evidence. Still, the question lingered. Who gained from Han and Bitch Pan's deaths? Financial investigators examined insurance policies, bank accounts, property ownership, outstanding debts, inheritance possibilities. Nothing immediately suggested enormous financial motivation. The family lived comfortably, but not extravagantly. No hidden fortunes emerged. No overwhelming debts demanded desperate solutions. Money alone seemed insufficient. Psychological motives often prove more complicated. At the hospital, Han Pan remained under constant medical supervision. Doctors fought infection, managed internal injuries, monitored neurological function. His condition remained critical. Detectives visited regularly but received the same answer. Not yet. He was still unable to participate in formal interviews. The investigation continued without him. Back at headquarters, Jennifer agreed to another recorded interview. Hours passed. Detectives maintained calm, respectful tones throughout. No accusations. No confrontation. Simply careful questioning. Walk us through the evening again. Tell us about the men. Describe their voices. Where were you standing? What happened next? Jennifer answered patiently, sometimes confidently, sometimes hesitating. The detectives noticed something increasingly important. Whenever questions remained broad, Jennifer spoke comfortably. When questions became specific, precise timing, exact movements, small physical details, her certainty often faded. Trauma could certainly explain that. So could fabrication. The challenge lay in distinguishing between the two. Outside the interview room, investigators compared notes. No single inconsistency justified arrest. No individual piece of evidence established conspiracy. Yet dozens of small observations were beginning to align. The crime scene, the untouched valuables, the changing statements, the digital records, the complicated family relationships, the hidden boyfriend. None alone solved the case. Together, they formed the outline of something far more disturbing than a failed robbery. Still, detectives lacked the one element capable of transforming suspicion into certainty. A witness from inside the basement. Someone who had seen what truly happened during those terrifying final moments. Days earlier, that possibility had seemed almost impossible. Doctors had doubted whether Han Pan would survive. Now, against extraordinary odds, his condition was slowly improving. Investigators received a brief message from hospital staff. The patient was becoming responsive. Not fully recovered. Not ready for extensive questioning. But awake. Detectives looked at one another without speaking. They all understood the significance. For nearly a week, the investigation had been built upon physical evidence and Jennifer's version of events. Now, for the first time, another voice might finally be heard. And that voice belonged to a father who had looked directly into the faces of the people who tried to kill him. For nearly a week, the investigation had moved forward without a voice from the basement. Detectives had photographs, ballistic reports, phone records, crime scene diagrams, hours of interviews. They had evidence that suggested something was wrong, but suspicion alone could never solve a homicide case. What they needed was someone who had survived. Against overwhelming odds, Han Pan had done exactly that. The doctors were cautious. Every movement caused him pain. His body carried the damage left by multiple gunshot wounds. Tubes surrounded his hospital bed. Monitors recorded every heartbeat with steady electronic rhythms that echoed softly through the intensive care unit. Nurses limited visitors, protecting both his physical recovery and his exhausted mind. When detectives finally received permission to speak with him, they entered the room without notebooks in their hands. There would be time for paperwork later. The first priority was simple. Listen. Han looked dramatically different from the man friends and neighbors remembered. His face was pale. His movements were painfully slow. Every breath reminded him how close he had come to dying. Yet behind the physical weakness, his eyes remained remarkably alert. He knew why the detectives had come. One investigator introduced himself quietly before asking the most basic question. Do you remember what happened that night? For several seconds, Han said nothing. Not because he could not remember. Because remembering hurt. The images returned immediately. The front door. The armed men. His wife. The basement. The gunshots. He closed his eyes briefly before beginning. His voice was weak, forcing detectives to lean forward so they would not miss a single word. He described armed men entering the house. He remembered being ordered downstairs. He remembered fearing that his family would be killed. Most of his account matched the physical evidence investigators had already reconstructed. Then came the detail that changed everything. Han paused, looked directly at the detectives, and quietly said something none of them expected. Jennifer was not tied up. Silence filled the hospital room. One detective carefully asked him to explain. Han spoke slowly, choosing every word with extraordinary care. He remembered seeing Jennifer moving freely inside the house. She was walking, speaking, interacting with the intruders. She did not appear terrified. She did not appear restrained. According to Han, she seemed calm, almost familiar with the men inside the house. For several moments, no one spoke. Detectives had trained themselves never to react emotionally during interviews. But internally, every assumption surrounding the investigation shifted. If Han's memory was accurate, Jennifer's entire account collapsed. The detectives did not challenge him. They did not suggest answers. Instead, they asked him to repeat everything from the beginning. Again, And again, each retelling remained remarkably consistent despite his injuries. Jennifer had not appeared to be another victim. She had appeared to know exactly what was happening. After leaving the hospital, investigators returned directly to headquarters. The atmosphere inside the investigation room changed immediately. Large evidence boards that had previously focused on unknown gunmen suddenly required rearrangement. Jennifer's photograph no longer occupied only the witness section. It moved, quietly, carefully, toward another part of the board. Not because detectives had concluded she was guilty, because evidence required them to consider the possibility. That distinction mattered enormously. Professional investigators do not investigate people they dislike. They investigate evidence wherever it leads. The next phase of the case began immediately. Jennifer's previous interviews were reviewed from beginning to end. Every recorded statement, every handwritten note, every timeline. Investigators searched for contradictions they might have overlooked before hearing Hand's account. Patterns emerged quickly. Jennifer had consistently described being tightly bound. Yet crime scene photographs showed restraints that appeared unusually loose. She claimed complete helplessness. Yet forensic reconstruction suggested movement inside the house inconsistent with her description. Small inconsistencies that once seemed understandable under trauma suddenly demanded much closer examination. Digital investigators accelerated their analysis of Jennifer's electronic devices. Cell phone records received renewed attention. Deleted text messages were recovered using forensic software. Call histories were reconstructed minute by minute. Communication with Daniel Wong became impossible to ignore. Thousands of ordinary messages existed between the couple. Conversations about daily life, relationships, frustrations, plans. But hidden among them were exchanges carrying very different meanings. Some discussed Jennifer's parents. Others referred indirectly to problems that needed permanent solutions. Several conversations involved individuals with criminal backgrounds. Nothing alone established conspiracy. Together, they painted a picture investigators found increasingly alarming. Financial investigators also expanded their work. Money often leaves trails people fail to notice. Bank withdrawals, transfers, cash movements. Although the promised payment to the gunman had not been fully completed, detectives identified financial activity consistent with preparations for something far beyond an ordinary family disagreement. Meanwhile, surveillance teams quietly observed Jennifer. She remained unaware of the dramatic shift occurring inside the investigation. Officially, she was still cooperating. Unofficially, detectives had begun examining every aspect of her behavior. Experienced investigators understand that guilty knowledge sometimes reveals itself in subtle ways. Not dramatic confessions, tiny inconsistencies, unexpected reactions, questions people ask that innocent witnesses rarely consider. Jennifer continued speaking publicly as though she had survived a traumatic home invasion. Friends offered sympathy. Community members expressed compassion. Many believed she had endured unimaginable horror. Detectives watched patiently. They understood something the public did not. Truth often requires time. Interrogations cannot begin until evidence is ready. Otherwise, suspects simply deny everything and walk away. The evidence needed to become overwhelming. Days later, Jennifer agreed to another formal interview. This time, the atmosphere differed noticeably from previous conversations. The detectives remained polite, professional, calm, but the questions became far more precise. Can you describe exactly how your hands were tied? Which direction were you facing? How long were you left alone? What did the attackers say to one another? Jennifer answered carefully. Yet every answer created opportunities for verification. Investigators already possessed forensic reports, phone records, medical evidence. Now they wanted to compare those objective facts against her evolving story. Several hours passed. Jennifer occasionally corrected herself. Sometimes she claimed memory problems caused by trauma. Detectives accepted those explanations without argument. The interview ended peacefully. But outside the room, investigators reached an important conclusion. Jennifer's account could no longer be reconciled with the growing body of evidence. Attention shifted toward Daniel Wong. His relationship with Jennifer had already been established. Now detectives explored his wider social circle. Phone records connected him to individuals known to police through previous criminal investigations. Those connections eventually led detectives towards several men capable of carrying out a contract killing. Search warrants followed. Additional electronic devices were seized. More communication records surfaced. Every new discovery strengthened the same disturbing theory. This had never been a random home invasion. It had been carefully planned. The appearance of robbery existed only to disguise the true objective. As investigators reconstructed the conspiracy, another disturbing realization emerged. The plan itself had changed. Evidence suggested the original intention may have involved killing both parents while allowing Jennifer to survive as the grieving daughter. She would inherit sympathy, perhaps eventually financial benefits. The surviving witness, the tragic victim. Everything depended upon one critical assumption: that Han Pan would die in the basement beside his wife. He did not. His survival destroyed the entire deception. The men responsible had fired multiple shots, believing they had left no witnesses behind. Instead, one wounded father carried the single observation that unraveled years of lies. Jennifer had not been tied. She had not been helpless. She had not behaved like someone watching strangers murder her family. That simple truth transformed the investigation. Within weeks, detectives believed they possessed enough evidence to act. Arrest plans were prepared with extraordinary care. Multiple suspects would need to be taken into custody simultaneously to prevent communication or destruction of evidence. Teams coordinated surveillance, search warrants, interview strategies. Every detail required precision. On the morning chosen for the operation, officers moved quietly across several locations. Police vehicles approached without sirens. Detectives carried arrest warrants signed by the court. The investigation that had begun as a mysterious home invasion was about to become something entirely different. Before the day ended, Jennifer Pan would no longer be questioned as the surviving daughter of murder victims. She would face investigators as the central suspect in a conspiracy to kill her own parents. And once the interrogations began, the carefully constructed life she had spent nearly a decade protecting would begin to collapse piece by piece under the weight of undeniable evidence. The arrests marked the end of one chapter. The courtroom would begin another. For investigators, solving a homicide does not end with identifying suspects. Every conclusion must survive the far greater challenge of public scrutiny, legal procedure, and the exacting standards of a criminal trial. Evidence that appears convincing inside an investigation room must withstand cross-examination before a judge and jury. Every statement, every photograph, every forensic report, every phone record must fit together without contradiction. In the Jennifer Pan case, prosecutors understood they were preparing for one of the most closely watched murder trials in modern Canadian history. The allegations alone seemed almost impossible to believe. A daughter accused of arranging the murder of her own parents. A mother dead. A father alive only because of extraordinary luck and determination. Years of deception stretching far beyond the night of the shooting. The public struggled to understand how a family that appeared so ordinary could become the center of such unimaginable violence. Before the trial began, prosecutors spent months organizing thousands of pages of evidence. Every witness was interviewed repeatedly. Forensic specialists prepared detailed reports explaining ballistic evidence, bloodstain analysis, crime scene reconstruction, and digital communications. Cell phone experts reconstructed timelines accurate to the minute. Financial investigators documented transactions connected to the conspiracy. Detectives organized interview recordings, ensuring every statement Jennifer had made could be compared against physical evidence. The case was enormous, not because it relied upon one dramatic piece of evidence, because dozens of independent pieces all pointed toward the same conclusion. Meanwhile, Jennifer remained in custody. The woman who had once presented herself as the traumatized survivor of a home invasion now faced charges that carried the possibility of spending the rest of her life behind bars. Her legal team began preparing an aggressive defense. They challenged investigative procedures, questioned witness reliability, examined every forensic conclusion. This was not unusual. Canada's justice system demands that every accused person receive a vigorous defense, regardless of the allegations. The truth is not determined by public opinion. It is established through evidence tested in court. When the trial finally opened in 2014, the courtroom filled quickly. Journalists occupied nearly every available seat. Family members arrived carrying years of grief. Members of the public waited outside, hoping to witness proceedings that had already generated nationwide attention. Court officers maintained strict order. The atmosphere remained respectful. Yet beneath the silence rested enormous emotional weight. For the prosecution, the opening statement presented a straightforward but devastating argument. This had never been a robbery. It had been a carefully planned murder for hire. The appearance of a home invasion existed only to mislead investigators. Jennifer Pan, they argued, had helped organize the attack alongside her boyfriend, Daniel Wong, and several hired gunmen. Every piece of evidence introduced afterward sought to support that central claim. The defense presented a very different picture. They questioned whether investigators had reached conclusions too quickly. They challenged interpretations of phone records. They argued that assumptions and circumstantial evidence should never replace proof beyond a reasonable doubt. As the trial progressed, jurors listened patiently. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Witness after witness entered the courtroom. Police officers described the crime scene exactly as they had found it on the night of November 8th. Forensic specialists explained why the physical evidence contradicted the appearance of a random robbery. Digital analysts presented communication records connecting Jennifer, Daniel Wong, and the men accused of carrying out the shootings. Every exhibit added another piece to the story. One of the most emotional moments arrived when Han Pan took the witness stand. Walking into the courtroom required enormous courage. Years earlier, he had nearly died in the basement of his own home. Now he faced another painful challenge. He would testify against his only surviving daughter. The courtroom fell silent as Han slowly entered. The scars left by the shooting were no longer immediately visible beneath his clothing. The emotional wounds, however, remained impossible to hide. Speaking calmly, he described the events of that night. He remembered armed men entering the house. He remembered being forced downstairs. He remembered hearing his wife beside him. Then he described the moment that changed the entire investigation. He told the jury that Jennifer had not appeared restrained. According to his testimony, she moved freely through the house and interacted with the intruders in a manner completely inconsistent with the story she later gave police. For many observers, the testimony was heartbreaking. A father was not simply identifying criminals. He was accusing his own daughter of participating in the murder of her mother. There could be no greater personal tragedy. Cross-examination followed. Defense attorneys questioned Han carefully. They explored the effects of severe trauma, the possibility of confusion, memory affected by blood loss, pain, medication, stress. These were legitimate legal questions. Traumatic events can alter memory. The jury would ultimately decide how much weight to place upon his testimony. The prosecution continued presenting digital evidence. Jurors examined phone records showing extensive communication before the attack. Text messages revealed relationships among the conspirators. Investigators explained how those communications aligned with the planning of the crime. Rather than relying upon emotion, prosecutors repeatedly returned to objective evidence. Timelines, call histories, financial records, crime scene reconstruction. The strategy was deliberate. Individual facts may appear open to interpretation. When dozens of independent facts all point in the same direction, the overall picture becomes much more difficult to dismiss. Jennifer herself became a central focus throughout the proceedings. Her videotaped police interviews were shown to the jury. Jurors observed her explanations, her emotional responses, the gradual inconsistencies that investigators had identified months earlier. Prosecutors argued that her changing accounts reflected deception rather than confusion. The defense disagreed. They argued that intense psychological trauma could easily explain inconsistent recollections. For weeks, the courtroom examined nearly every minute of Jennifer's actions before, during, and after the shooting. Nothing was considered too small. The emergency call, the restraints, the movement inside the house, electronic communications, relationships, financial arrangements. By the time closing arguments arrived, the jury had heard testimony from dozens of witnesses. Both sides asked jurors to remember the same principle: reasonable doubt. For prosecutors, the evidence eliminated it. For the defense, unanswered questions remained. The responsibility resting upon the jury was immense. No decision could restore Bitch Ha Pan's life. No verdict could erase Han Pan's suffering. The only remaining question was legal responsibility. After lengthy deliberations, the jury returned to the courtroom. Everyone stood. Silence settled across the room. Jennifer Pan was found guilty of first-degree murder in connection with the death of her mother and guilty of conspiracy to commit murder, along with additional convictions related to the attempted murder of her father. The verdict reflected the jury's conclusion that the attack had been deliberately planned rather than occurring during a spontaneous robbery. When the sentence was announced, Jennifer received life imprisonment, with no eligibility to apply for parole for 25 years on the first-degree murder conviction, alongside concurrent sentences on the related conspiracy offenses. For Han Pan, however, the verdict brought no celebration. Justice and healing are not the same. The legal process had identified those responsible. It could not return the woman with whom he had built an entire life. It could not erase the memory of hearing gunshots in his own basement. It could not remove the unbearable knowledge that the conspiracy had originated within his own family. The courtroom gradually emptied. Reporters hurried outside to broadcast the verdict across Canada. Television stations interrupted programming. Newspapers prepared front-page headlines. The Jennifer Pan case instantly became one of the country's defining true crime stories. Yet the legal story did not end there. Years later, appellate courts carefully reviewed the convictions, examining whether the jury had received proper legal instructions on every charge. Some aspects of the case remained subject to further judicial proceedings, demonstrating that even after a highly publicized verdict, the justice system continues to examine whether legal standards have been correctly applied. For the Pan family, however, no future ruling could change the fundamental truth established on the night of November 8, 2010. One parent had lost her life. Another had lost nearly everything else. And a family that once symbolized sacrifice, discipline, and hope had become permanently remembered for one of the most devastating betrayals in Canadian criminal history. Long after the courtroom emptied and the television cameras disappeared, the Pan family story continued to leave questions that no verdict could answer. Court decisions establish legal responsibility. They do not explain every human emotion. They do not rebuild broken families. They do not erase grief. For the public, the Jennifer Pan case became another unforgettable true crime story. Headlines summarized the shocking facts in a few sentences. A daughter had orchestrated a murder-for-hire plot against her own parents. A mother was dead. A father survived and testified against his own child. The case seemed almost too extraordinary to be real. But behind every headline stood ordinary people whose lives had been permanently destroyed. Bitch Pan never became the center of attention she deserved. Like many victims of notorious crimes, her identity was gradually overshadowed by the person accused of causing her death. Yet before November 8, 2010, she had lived a life defined by quiet sacrifice rather than public recognition. She had spent decades working, raising a family, supporting her husband, and believing that every difficult day would eventually create a better future for her children. She would never grow old beside the man she had built a life with. She would never celebrate another family holiday. She would never see grandchildren. Everything ended in the basement of the home she had helped create. Remembering that truth is important, because true crime should never become entertainment at the expense of the people whose lives were stolen. Han Pan faced a different kind of sentence. Unlike those convicted in court, his punishment carried no official end date. He survived. Many people assume survival represents victory. In reality, surviving violence often means carrying its consequences every day afterward. His body eventually healed enough to leave the hospital. His emotional wounds were far more complicated. He returned to a house that no longer felt like home. Every hallway contained memories. Every room reminded him of his wife. The basement could never again become simply another part of the house. Trauma changes places forever. It changes sounds. It changes routines. It changes ordinary moments that once carried no special meaning. Perhaps the greatest burden Han carried was not physical. It was emotional. Parents spend their lives protecting their children. Very few must face the unimaginable reality of testifying against one of them in a murder trial. Nothing in life prepares someone for that decision. He did not simply lose his wife. He effectively lost his daughter as well. Even when justice requires difficult testimony, love and heartbreak can exist at the same time. Those emotions are not mutually exclusive. One can love a child. One can also acknowledge devastating truths about that child's actions. That painful contradiction remains one of the most tragic aspects of the entire case. Jennifer Pan also became a symbol, though not in the way she could ever have imagined. For psychologists, criminologists, and family therapists, her story prompted difficult conversations about identity, pressure, deception, and the consequences of avoiding honest communication. It is important, however, not to reduce the case to a simple explanation. Many young people experience strict parenting. Many struggle with impossible expectations. Many lie to avoid disappointing family members. Almost none choose violence. The overwhelming majority never come close to committing crimes. The Jennifer Pan case stands out precisely because it is extraordinarily rare. No single factor explains what happened. Years of deception, fear of failure, relationship conflict, poor decisions, criminal associations, personal responsibility. Each element contributed to a tragedy that cannot be understood through one simple narrative. That complexity matters. Simple explanations often create misleading lessons. The truth is usually more uncomfortable. Throughout the investigation and trial, detectives repeatedly emphasized that evidence, not assumptions, guided every conclusion they reached. The crime scene raised questions. Digital evidence answered some of them. Witness testimony answered others. Together, those independent pieces formed the picture presented in court. It serves as a reminder of another important truth. Modern homicide investigations rely less on dramatic confessions than on patient reconstruction. Phones remember. Financial records remember. Security cameras remember. Forensic evidence remembers. Even when people change their stories, physical evidence often continues telling its own. The Jennifer Pan investigation demonstrated extraordinary persistence rather than extraordinary luck. Without careful forensic work, inconsistencies might have been dismissed. Without digital analysis, hidden relationships might never have been uncovered. Without Pan's survival, investigators might never have learned what truly happened inside the house that night. His survival changed everything. It transformed a staged robbery into an exposed conspiracy. It prevented a carefully planned deception from becoming accepted history. Years later, the case found new audiences around the world through documentaries, podcasts, books, and online discussions. Millions of viewers watched dramatizations of the investigation, trying to understand how years of lies could eventually end in murder. Public fascination with the story continues because it forces people to confront uncomfortable questions. How well do we truly know those closest to us? How much pressure can someone carry before making catastrophic choices? When does a lie become a life? And how can ordinary families recognize warning signs before relationships become impossible to repair? No documentary can fully answer those questions. No podcast can provide a universal lesson. Every family is different. Every relationship is unique. Yet one truth appears throughout this tragedy. Secrets grow heavier with time. Jennifer's first deception was relatively small. A failed class. A hidden disappointment. Had the truth emerged then, it almost certainly would have caused anger, embarrassment, and conflict. Those consequences felt unbearable to her. So she lied. That lie required another. Then another. Years passed. Eventually, the fictional life she created became more important than the real one she was living. When reality threatened to destroy that illusion, she searched for escape instead of confession. That decision began a chain of events that no one could stop. The story also reminds parents of another difficult reality. Love expressed only through expectations can sometimes leave children believing that failure makes them unworthy. Most families overcome those misunderstandings through communication. Some require counseling. Some require time. But silence rarely solves them. Honest conversations, however painful, almost always remain safer than years of hidden fear. At the same time, responsibility cannot be transferred away from the person who ultimately chooses violence. Countless people experience disappointment without harming others. Choices matter. Accountability matters. Compassion for difficult circumstances should never erase responsibility for criminal actions. That balance is essential when examining any true crime story. It allows us to recognize human complexity without minimizing the suffering of victims. Today, the Pan residence stands as just another house to passing strangers. Cars continue driving through the neighborhood. Children still ride bicycles during warm afternoons. Seasons continue changing. New families move into nearby homes, often unaware of the history attached to one quiet suburban street. Life moves forward because it always does. Memory, however, remains. For investigators, the case remains a landmark example of patient police work. For legal scholars, it illustrates the importance of careful judicial review and the continuing role of appeals within the justice system. For psychologists, it continues to provoke discussion about deception, family dynamics, and identity. For the public, it serves as a reminder that appearances can conceal unimaginable realities. But above all else, this story belongs to the victims. To Bitch Ha Pan, whose life ended because of a betrayal no parent should ever have to fear. To Han Pan, whose determination to survive ensured that the truth would eventually be heard. And to every family whose love is tested by expectation, misunderstanding, and silence. The Jennifer Pan case is not ultimately a story about a perfect crime. It is the story of a perfect illusion that slowly collapsed under the weight of truth. For years, lies created a world that seemed easier than reality. In a single November night, that illusion dissolved forever. What remained was grief, justice, questions without comfortable answers, and one enduring reminder that the strongest foundations of any family are not built upon perfection or achievement, but upon honesty, trust, and the courage to face difficult truths before they become irreversible tragedies. Long before detectives uncovered phone records, before forensic analysts reconstructed timelines, and before a jury listened to months of testimony inside a Canadian courtroom, another story had already been unfolding for years. It was a story that left no fingerprints, no bloodstains, no surveillance footage. It unfolded quietly inside everyday conversations, ordinary expectations, and countless small decisions that seemed insignificant at the time. The Jennifer Pan case is often remembered because of its shocking outcome. A daughter was accused of helping arrange the murder of her own parents. That fact alone is enough to make international headlines. But if we stop there, we risk misunderstanding the case entirely. Human behavior rarely changes overnight. Major crimes are almost never born from a single moment. Instead, they emerge from a long chain of choices, pressures, relationships, and opportunities. Understanding those factors does not excuse criminal behavior. Responsibility for violent acts remains with the people who choose to commit them. But examining those factors can help explain how an apparently ordinary life gradually moved toward extraordinary tragedy. One of the most striking features of Jennifer Pan's story is not the violence itself. It is the deception. Years before investigators discovered any murder conspiracy, Jennifer had already become trapped inside another elaborate construction, a fictional version of her own life. According to evidence presented during the investigation and trial, she falsely told her parents that she had been accepted into university, was attending classes, volunteering in hospitals, and making steady progress toward a professional career. To support those claims, she produced fabricated report cards, forged documents, and convincing explanations whenever questions arose. Maintaining that false identity required remarkable organization. Every invented class schedule needed to remain consistent. Every imaginary examination required believable results. Every conversation with her parents demanded careful preparation. For years, the deception continued. Many psychologists who study long-term deception have observed a common pattern. The first lie is often designed to avoid immediate consequences. Someone fears embarrassment. Someone wants to escape disappointment. Someone hopes to delay an uncomfortable conversation. The lie appears temporary. The person intends to tell the truth later. But later becomes tomorrow. Tomorrow becomes next week. Eventually, the original lie demands another to protect it. Then another. The deception grows until abandoning it appears more frightening than continuing it. This general psychological pattern has been observed in many contexts, from academic dishonesty to financial fraud. It is not unique to Jennifer Pan, nor does it explain every case. But it offers a useful framework for understanding how small acts of dishonesty can gradually develop into complex systems that feel impossible to escape. In Jennifer's case, investigators uncovered evidence suggesting that the fictional life she presented had become extraordinarily detailed. By the time her parents discovered portions of the truth, years had already passed. Imagine the emotional weight of carrying such a secret every single day. Each morning begins with another performance. Each evening requires another explanation. Every family dinner becomes another opportunity to protect the illusion. Whether driven by fear, shame, or something more complicated, living inside a fabricated identity demands constant mental effort. That observation should not be mistaken for sympathy toward criminal behavior. Many people experience intense pressure without harming others. Many admit mistakes before deception grows beyond control. Others seek help from friends, family, counselors, or teachers. Jennifer ultimately made choices for which she was held criminally responsible. Recognizing the possible psychological burden of prolonged deception does not diminish that responsibility. It simply reminds us that the road toward catastrophic decisions is often much longer than the public first realizes. Another aspect frequently discussed after the case became public involved family expectations. Media coverage often described the Pan household as highly disciplined. Education occupied a central place within family life. Achievement was encouraged. Failure was deeply disappointing. It is important, however, to approach this topic carefully. Millions of families around the world maintain high academic expectations. The overwhelming majority never experience anything resembling this tragedy. Strict parenting alone does not produce violent crime. Researchers who study family relationships consistently emphasize that human behavior results from many interacting influences rather than one simple cause. Every individual responds differently to similar circumstances. Some become highly motivated. Others develop anxiety. Some rebel openly. Others withdraw quietly. Still others communicate honestly about their struggles. No single parenting style determines someone's future actions. What appears more significant in Jennifer Pan's story is the apparent breakdown of honest communication. According to evidence presented during the investigation, Jennifer did not tell her parents when academic difficulties first emerged. Instead of asking for help, she concealed them. As the deception expanded, each opportunity for honesty became increasingly difficult. This phenomenon is sometimes described in psychology as escalation of commitment. People continue investing in failing decisions because admitting error becomes psychologically more painful than continuing the original mistake. The concept appears in business failures, political decisions, gambling behavior, and personal relationships. It has also been observed in prolonged deception. Again, it does not explain criminal violence. It simply helps explain why someone might continue defending an unsustainable false reality long after escape becomes possible. Another question frequently raised after the trial concerned identity. Who was Jennifer Pan? Was she the successful daughter her parents believed she had become? Clearly not. Was she entirely defined by years of deception? That answer is also too simple. Human identity is rarely divided into heroes and villains. People often present different versions of themselves depending on their audience. Students behave differently at school than at home. Employees behave differently at work than with friends. Social media encourages carefully edited versions of everyday life. Most of these differences remain harmless. Problems arise when the gap between public identity and private reality grows so large that maintaining it consumes nearly every aspect of daily life. In Jennifer's case, evidence suggested that two incompatible realities eventually existed side by side. Inside one reality, she was the successful university student preparing for a respected professional career. Inside the other, she knew that future did not exist. Maintaining both worlds simultaneously required extraordinary emotional compartmentalization. Psychologists use the term cognitive dissonance to describe the discomfort people experience when actions conflict with beliefs or self-image. Individuals often attempt to reduce that discomfort by changing beliefs, changing behavior, or creating new explanations that make contradictions easier to tolerate. Exactly how Jennifer experienced those internal conflicts remains unknowable. Only she could fully describe her private thoughts, and even then, memory and personal interpretation have limits. For that reason, responsible analysis must distinguish clearly between verified evidence and speculation. What investigators establish through evidence is one thing. What someone privately felt remains another. True crime storytelling carries an important responsibility. It is tempting to create dramatic psychological explanations because audiences naturally seek simple answers. The reality is often more uncertain. No psychologist, investigator, or journalist can accurately reconstruct every private thought inside another person's mind. The evidence reveals actions. Sometimes it reveals planning. Occasionally it reveals motives expressed through words or messages. It rarely reveals the complete emotional landscape that produced those actions. That uncertainty deserves respect. As researchers continued examining the Jennifer Pan case, attention increasingly shifted toward another influential factor. Not her relationship with her parents, not even the years of deception, but the relationship that existed outside the family home. The relationship with Daniel Wong. For investigators, understanding that relationship became essential, not because romantic relationships inevitably lead to crime, but because the evidence showed that it played a significant role in the events that followed. How two young adults, each making their own independent choices, gradually became connected to a conspiracy involving hired gunmen remains one of the most disturbing aspects of the entire case. And exploring that relationship requires separating documented facts from assumptions, while recognizing that every major decision still belonged to the individuals who made it. One of the greatest misconceptions surrounding criminal investigations is the belief that every major crime begins with violence. In reality, investigators often discover that violence is the final step in a much longer process. Before a weapon is ever fired, there are conversations, decisions, compromises, moments when people choose one path instead of another. The Jennifer Pan case illustrates this progression with unsettling clarity. By the time detectives began examining phone records and digital communications, the conspiracy was already complete. But the evidence suggested that it had not appeared overnight. It had developed gradually through a series of choices involving multiple people, each making independent decisions that ultimately converged into a single tragic outcome. Among those relationships, none attracted more attention than Jennifer's relationship with Daniel Wong. According to evidence presented during the investigation and at trial, Jennifer and Daniel had maintained a romantic relationship despite strong opposition from her parents. The relationship itself was not unusual. Countless adults experience disagreements with their families over whom they choose to date. What made this case different was not the existence of the relationship. It was what investigators concluded happened afterward. As detectives reconstructed thousands of phone records, text messages, and witness statements, they found extensive communication between Jennifer and Daniel before the attack. Those communications became one component of the broader evidentiary picture presented to the jury. Rather than relying on a single message or conversation, investigators examined patterns over time, comparing digital evidence with financial records, witness testimony, and the physical evidence recovered from the crime scene. This approach reflects an important principle in modern criminal investigations. Rarely does one piece of evidence solve a case. Instead, investigators ask whether many independent pieces all support the same conclusion. Imagine a jigsaw puzzle. One piece reveals almost nothing. 20 connected pieces begin to show shapes. Hundreds of correctly connected pieces reveal an unmistakable picture. That is how major homicide investigations are built. Psychologists sometimes describe another phenomenon that can emerge in close relationships during periods of prolonged stress. People often reinforce one another's beliefs. When two individuals repeatedly discuss the same frustrations, disappointments, or perceived obstacles, those conversations can gradually influence how each person views the situation. In healthy relationships, this mutual influence often encourages resilience, problem-solving, and emotional support. In unhealthy situations, however, repeated conversations can strengthen harmful ways of thinking. Researchers sometimes refer to this as mutual reinforcement. The concept does not suggest that one individual loses responsibility for personal decisions. Every person remains accountable for his or her own actions. Instead, it recognizes that close relationships can amplify existing attitudes, whether positive or negative. Exactly how those interpersonal dynamics developed between Jennifer and Daniel can never be known with complete certainty. Their private emotional experiences remain beyond the reach of investigators. What is documented are their communications, their actions, and the evidence examined during the trial. Another psychological concept sometimes discussed in relation to complex criminal conspiracies is normalization. Human beings possess a remarkable ability to adapt to circumstances. A decision that initially seems shocking can gradually begin to feel ordinary if discussed repeatedly over time. This phenomenon appears in many contexts: financial fraud, organized crime, corporate corruption, extremist groups. Participants often describe crossing ethical boundaries one small step at a time rather than through one dramatic decision. Again, this concept explains a possible process observed across many criminal cases. It should not be interpreted as proof of any individual's private mental state. In the Jennifer Pan case, prosecutors argued that planning occurred over time rather than emerging spontaneously during one emotional argument. The evidence presented in court, including communication records and testimony, supported their theory that the attack involved preparation rather than impulse. That distinction mattered legally. An impulsive act and a planned conspiracy are treated very differently under criminal law because planning demonstrates deliberate decision-making over an extended period. Planning also introduces repeated opportunities to stop. Every phone call could have been the last. Every meeting could have ended the conspiracy. Every message could have been replaced with a confession, a request for help, or a decision to walk away. Instead, according to the prosecution's evidence, the planning continued. This observation highlights another uncomfortable truth about serious crime. Many catastrophic events are preventable until the very final moments. Opportunities exist. Choices exist. Alternatives exist. The tragedy lies partly in the fact that those alternatives are never taken. As criminologists study cases involving conspiracy, they often distinguish between motivation and justification. Motivation asks why someone may have wanted a particular outcome. Justification asks how someone convinces himself or herself that the chosen method is acceptable. The two are not the same. Many people have motives to change difficult situations. Few justify murder. That distinction is critical. Understanding possible motives should never be confused with excusing criminal behavior. Throughout the Jennifer Pan investigation, detectives repeatedly returned to objective evidence rather than speculation. They did not attempt to prove every private thought. Instead, they demonstrated actions. Who communicated with whom? When those communications occurred? How they aligned with other evidence? Where individuals were located? Which statements changed over time? This evidence-based approach became one of the strongest features of the investigation. It reminds us that successful criminal investigations depend less upon dramatic theories than upon careful verification. Every claim must be supported. Every conclusion must withstand scrutiny. Every interpretation must remain consistent with the facts. That commitment to evidence is especially important in high-profile cases, where public curiosity often encourages speculation far beyond what the record can actually support. Another aspect of the Jennifer Pan case that continues to interest psychologists involves the extraordinary length of the deception that preceded the crime. Maintaining a fabricated academic life for years required sustained organization. It also required repeated interactions in which reality and fiction existed side by side. Researchers who study deception have found that long-term lies often become increasingly difficult to manage because they demand continuous maintenance. People must remember previous statements, avoid contradictions, create new explanations whenever unexpected questions arise. The mental effort involved can become exhausting. Some individuals eventually confess simply because maintaining the deception becomes impossible. Others continue expanding it until circumstances force the truth into the open. According to the evidence presented during the trial, Jennifer's deception continued until her parents uncovered significant portions of the truth. That discovery fundamentally changed the family's daily life. Restrictions reportedly increased. Trust deteriorated. Conflict became more visible. These developments formed part of the factual background examined during the investigation. They do not, however, provide a complete explanation for what followed. Millions of families experience broken trust without violence. Millions of young adults face disappointment without criminal conduct. The uniqueness of the Jennifer Pan case lies precisely in how extraordinarily uncommon its outcome was. Perhaps the most enduring psychological lesson from this tragedy concerns honesty. Honesty is often uncomfortable in the short term. Admitting failure can feel humiliating. Confessing mistakes can disappoint people we love. But dishonesty carries a hidden cost. Each lie creates another obligation, another fear, another secret. Over time, those accumulated burdens can distort relationships until authentic communication becomes almost impossible. For most people, that cycle eventually ends with damaged trust. In this case, according to the court's findings on the conspiracy charges, it ended in irreversible violence. That distinction should never be forgotten. The overwhelming majority of people who struggle with fear, family pressure, or deception never become involved in violent crime. Jennifer Pan's story remains exceptional because of the extraordinary decisions that followed years of dishonesty. Not because dishonesty itself inevitably leads to violence. As the legal proceedings concluded, psychologists, criminologists, investigators, and members of the public continued examining the case from different perspectives. Each discipline asked different questions. The police asked whether the evidence proved criminal responsibility. The courts asked whether the evidence met the legal standard beyond a reasonable doubt for each charge. Psychologists examined broader concepts of deception, identity, and family dynamics. Criminologists explored how conspiracies develop and why some individuals cross moral boundaries while others in similar circumstances do not. Together, those perspectives reveal something larger than one criminal case. They remind us that behind every notorious crime lies a complex interaction of choices, relationships, circumstances, and individual responsibility. No single explanation is sufficient. No simple answer exists. Only the evidence remains. And in the Jennifer Pan case, that evidence tells the story of how years of carefully maintained deception eventually collided with reality, producing consequences that forever changed the lives of everyone involved. Every major criminal case eventually reaches a point where the legal proceedings end, the evidence is archived, and the headlines begin to fade. The Jennifer Pan case has never truly reached that point. More than a decade after the shooting, investigators, psychologists, journalists, law students, and members of the public continue examining the events of November 8, 2010. New documentaries, podcasts, and discussions have introduced the story to audiences who were children, or not yet born, when the crime first occurred. The reason is not simply because the crime was shocking. Canada has investigated many brutal murders. What makes this case continue to resonate is that it forces people to confront uncomfortable questions about trust, family, identity, and the hidden lives people sometimes create behind ordinary appearances. For police investigators, the case became an enduring example of why assumptions can be dangerous. When officers first arrived at the Pan residence, they encountered what appeared to be a violent home invasion. There were gunshot victims, a traumatized daughter, no obvious suspects. If investigators had accepted that initial appearance without scrutiny, the truth might never have emerged. Instead, they followed the evidence patiently. The crime scene was examined without prejudice. Jennifer's statements were documented rather than accepted unquestioningly. Forensic specialists reconstructed the physical evidence. Digital analysts examined communication records. Most importantly, investigators remained willing to revise their working theory as new information emerged. That willingness to change direction is one of the defining characteristics of professional criminal investigations. Good investigators do not become emotionally attached to their first hypothesis. They remain attached only to the evidence. As new facts appear, the theory must change with them. That principle ultimately transformed what first appeared to be a robbery into a conspiracy investigation. The case also illustrates the extraordinary importance of forensic science in modern criminal justice. Television often portrays forensic evidence as dramatic discoveries that solve crimes instantly. Reality is far less glamorous. Each laboratory examination required time. Every phone record had to be authenticated. Every fingerprint required comparison. Every ballistic report underwent careful review. None of these individual processes solved the case independently. Together, however, they created a body of evidence that supported the conclusions presented at trial. Technology has changed criminal investigations profoundly over the past 2 decades. Mobile phones preserve communication histories. Digital devices record locations. Financial systems document transactions. Security systems capture movements that once disappeared forever. The Jennifer Pan investigation reflected this modern reality. Human memory remained important, but objective digital evidence became equally significant in reconstructing the sequence of events. Beyond criminal investigation, the case has also become a subject of discussion among educators and family counselors. Not because it offers simple lessons. It does not. Simple lessons rarely emerge from complex tragedies. Instead, the case encourages broader conversations about communication within families. Many parents naturally want their children to succeed. Many children desperately want to avoid disappointing those parents. Usually, those desires coexist without serious consequences. Sometimes, however, fear begins replacing honesty. Children hide poor grades. Parents misunderstand silence. Both sides become trapped inside expectations that neither fully understands. Again, this observation should never be interpreted as suggesting that parenting styles explain violent crime. They do not. The overwhelming majority of families experiencing conflict never encounter anything remotely similar to this tragedy. Nevertheless, open communication remains one of the strongest protections against prolonged deception. When mistakes can be admitted without destroying relationships, people are generally more willing to seek help before problems grow beyond control. Jennifer Pan's years of fabricated academic success demonstrate how damaging prolonged dishonesty can become. Each fabricated report card postponed one difficult conversation. Each invented achievement delayed reality. Each successful deception made the next confession feel even more impossible. Eventually, according to the evidence presented in court, the fictional life required increasingly desperate decisions to preserve it. The tragedy reminds us that truth usually becomes more difficult, not easier, to reveal with time. One honest conversation delayed for years often becomes hundreds of conversations built upon falsehoods. Another enduring legacy of the case concerns public fascination with true crime itself. Why do millions of people continue reading about crimes like this? The answer varies from person to person. Some seek to understand criminal psychology. Others hope to recognize warning signs in their own lives. Some are interested in investigative techniques or courtroom procedure. Others simply struggle to comprehend how ordinary lives can produce extraordinary violence. Responsible true crime storytelling should serve a purpose beyond entertainment. It should remember victims as human beings rather than merely names in a criminal file. It should distinguish verified facts from speculation. It should acknowledge uncertainty where uncertainty exists. And it should avoid transforming offenders into mythical figures whose crimes overshadow the people they harmed. The Jennifer Pan case illustrates why those principles matter. The most enduring victim was Bitch Ha Pan. Her life deserves to be remembered for far more than the circumstances of her death. She was a wife, a mother, an immigrant who helped build a new life in Canada through years of work and sacrifice. Those achievements existed long before the crime that brought international attention to her family. Han Pan likewise deserves recognition, not simply as a surviving witness, but as an individual whose determination fundamentally altered the course of the investigation. Had he not survived his injuries, detectives would have faced an entirely different case. His testimony became one important part of a much larger evidentiary picture. His survival ensured that investigators could compare physical evidence with the observations of someone who had witnessed the attack from inside the house. That combination proved invaluable. The legal journey itself also reminds us that justice is rarely a single moment. Trials are only one stage. Appeals exist because legal systems recognize the possibility of procedural error. Reviewing convictions does not necessarily mean earlier findings were factually incorrect. Rather, appellate courts examine whether legal rules were properly followed and whether every defendant received the fair trial required by law. That process reflects the strength of the justice system rather than a weakness. Justice depends not only upon reaching accurate outcomes, but also upon reaching them through fair procedures. The Jennifer Pan case continued to move through aspects of the appellate process after the original verdicts, illustrating that even highly publicized cases remain subject to careful judicial review. For many observers, perhaps the most haunting aspect of the entire story is how ordinary it appeared before the violence. There were no obvious warning signs visible to neighbors. No public displays of extreme conflict. No dramatic incidents that attracted widespread attention. The Pan family looked like thousands of other hardworking families across Canada. That ordinary appearance reminds us of an important truth. Most people's private struggles remain invisible. We rarely know the full story unfolding inside another person's home. That reality encourages humility rather than judgment. It reminds us to approach others with compassion while also recognizing that personal responsibility remains essential. Ultimately, the Jennifer Pan case leaves behind two separate legacies. One belongs to the criminal justice system. It demonstrates the value of patient investigation, forensic science, careful courtroom procedure, and evidence-based decision-making. The other belongs to society itself. It reminds us that honesty is often painful in the moment, but almost always less destructive than years of deception. It reminds parents and children alike that communication matters more than appearances. It reminds investigators never to stop asking difficult questions. And it reminds every reader, listener, or viewer that behind every notorious case are real lives forever changed. The story of Jennifer Pan is not remembered because it contains the perfect crime. It is remembered because it reveals how fragile trust can become when truth is replaced by illusion. The illusion lasted for years. The consequences lasted forever. In the end, the investigation uncovered what really happened inside one quiet Canadian home. But the larger questions the case raises, about family, honesty, responsibility, and the choices that define a life, continue long after the courtroom doors have closed. Some criminal cases disappear from public memory within months. Others remain part of a nation's collective consciousness for decades. The Jennifer Pan case belongs to the second category. Its enduring impact is not measured only by media coverage or documentary films. It continues to be discussed because it challenges assumptions people often make about family, success, and the appearance of normal life. Even years after the shooting, investigators, criminologists, psychologists, journalists, and legal scholars continue to examine different aspects of the case. Not because they expect new sensational revelations, but because it raises difficult questions that have no simple answers. One of the most significant lessons concerns appearances. From the outside, the Pan family seemed remarkably ordinary. Neighbors saw hardworking parents. Teachers knew Jennifer as a quiet student. Friends understood parts of her life, but not all of it. No single person possessed the complete picture. That is true in many communities. Human beings naturally form impressions based on limited information. We see people at work, at school, or during brief social encounters. Rarely do we witness the private struggles taking place behind closed doors. The Jennifer Pan case serves as a reminder that appearances can never substitute for evidence. That lesson applies not only to criminal investigations, but also to everyday life. Another lasting lesson involves the role of persistence in police work. When detectives first arrived at the Pan residence, they encountered what looked like a violent home invasion. Nothing required them to assume immediately that the surviving daughter might be involved. In fact, doing so without evidence would have been poor investigative practice. Instead, they followed a disciplined process. They examined the crime scene, collected forensic evidence, conducted interviews, compared statements, reviewed digital records, tested every theory against objective facts. As each new piece of information emerged, investigators adjusted their understanding of the case. That willingness to revise conclusions is one of the strongest safeguards against investigative error. Professional investigators understand that confidence should grow from evidence, not intuition. The case has also become an important example in discussions about digital evidence. A generation ago, investigators relied heavily upon eyewitness testimony and physical evidence collected at crime scenes. Today, digital technology often preserves another layer of information. Mobile phones record communication. Location data helps reconstruct movement. Electronic devices preserve conversations long after participants believe they have disappeared. Financial transactions create detailed timelines. These forms of evidence do not replace traditional investigative techniques. They complement them. In the Jennifer Pan investigation, digital evidence became one component of a much broader evidentiary picture. The significance of that development extends well beyond one case. Modern criminal investigations increasingly depend upon careful analysis of electronic information alongside forensic science and witness testimony. Another reason the case continues attracting attention is that it highlights the complexity of human decision-making. Public discussions sometimes search for one defining explanation. Was it family pressure? Was it fear? Was it deception? Was it influence from other individuals? Real life is rarely that simple. Researchers across psychology and criminology generally agree that serious criminal behavior develops through multiple interacting factors rather than a single cause. Every individual responds differently to adversity. Many people experience disappointment. Many struggle with demanding expectations. Many make serious mistakes. Very few commit violent crimes. Recognizing that complexity prevents us from drawing misleading conclusions. It also reminds us that understanding contributing factors is fundamentally different from excusing criminal conduct. The Jennifer Pan case illustrates another important principle. Small decisions often shape the future more than dramatic moments. When people think about notorious crimes, they usually focus on the final act. The shooting, the arrests, the courtroom. Yet those events occurred only after years of earlier decisions. Each deception represented a choice. Each opportunity to tell the truth represented another choice. Each attempt to preserve a false reality created additional consequences. By the time investigators reconstructed the conspiracy, they were examining not one isolated decision, but a long sequence of interconnected actions. That progression offers an important lesson beyond criminal justice. Major crises in ordinary life often develop gradually. Financial disasters, broken relationships, professional misconduct, academic fraud. Many begin with relatively small choices that seem temporary at the time. Addressing problems early is almost always easier than managing years of accumulated consequences. Another lasting impact of the case concerns public understanding of trauma. Much attention naturally focused upon Jennifer because of the criminal proceedings. Far less attention remained on those whose lives were permanently altered by violence. Bichha Pan lost her life. Han Pan survived devastating injuries that forever changed his future. Family members, friends, neighbors, emergency responders, investigators, medical professionals, and others connected to the case also experienced emotional consequences. Violent crime affects far more people than those directly involved. Its effects spread through families, workplaces, neighborhoods, and communities. Recognizing that wider impact helps ensure that discussions remain centered upon victims rather than solely upon offenders. The Jennifer Pan case has also become widely discussed in classrooms where future investigators, lawyers, and criminologists study criminal procedure. Students examining the investigation often focus less on the shocking facts and more on investigative methodology. How were interviews conducted? How was digital evidence authenticated? How were forensic conclusions integrated into the broader investigation? How did prosecutors organize thousands of pages of evidence into a coherent presentation for the jury? These practical questions demonstrate why certain criminal cases become educational resources long after legal proceedings conclude. The answers help improve future investigations. They also reinforce the importance of professional standards within the justice system. Media coverage surrounding the case has likewise evolved over time. Early reporting naturally emphasized the dramatic allegations and courtroom developments. Later documentaries and long-form journalism explored broader themes, including family dynamics, deception, investigative techniques, and public fascination with true crime. Responsible storytelling requires balancing public interest with accuracy. Complex cases should resist oversimplification. When uncertainty exists, it should be acknowledged. When facts have been established through evidence and judicial proceedings, they should be distinguished from speculation or rumor. Maintaining that distinction is essential, especially in cases that continue attracting worldwide attention. The Jennifer Pan case further reminds us that justice is not measured solely by punishment. The criminal courts determine legal responsibility. They do not restore lost lives. They do not erase grief. They cannot repair relationships permanently destroyed by violence. Justice fulfills an important social purpose by holding individuals accountable according to law. Healing, however, follows a different path. It belongs to survivors, families, and communities. Sometimes healing remains incomplete for the rest of a person's life. Perhaps the most enduring message of this case is remarkably simple. Truth matters. Not because honesty guarantees happiness. Not because difficult conversations become easy. But because reality eventually demands recognition. Problems ignored rarely disappear. Secrets protected for years rarely remain hidden forever. The longer truth is postponed, the greater the potential consequences become. For most people, those consequences involve damaged trust or broken relationships. In extraordinarily rare situations such as this one, the consequences become irreversible. As time passes, future generations will likely remember the Jennifer Pan case for more than its shocking facts. They will remember it as a cautionary example studied by investigators, discussed by legal scholars, examined by psychologists, and reflected upon by families seeking to understand how ordinary lives can be transformed by extraordinary decisions. The evidence gathered by investigators reconstructed what happened inside the Pan home. The legal system determined criminal responsibility through judicial proceedings. History will preserve those facts. The deeper questions, however, about honesty, responsibility, communication, and the consequences of choices made over many years, will continue challenging anyone who studies this remarkable and deeply tragic case. In the end, the Jennifer Pan investigation reminds us that the pursuit of truth is rarely fast, rarely simple, and never effortless. But when investigators remain committed to evidence, when courts remain committed to fairness, and when society remains willing to learn from tragedy rather than merely consume it, even the darkest cases can leave behind lessons that help prevent future harm. And perhaps that is the most meaningful legacy of all. When people remember the Jennifer Pan case, they often remember the facts first. A daughter, a murder-for-hire plot, a surviving father, years of deception. Those facts are unforgettable. Yet facts alone rarely explain why a story continues to resonate long after court proceedings have concluded. The lasting impact of this case lies not only in what happened inside one family home in Ontario, but in what the tragedy reveals about the fragile nature of trust itself. Trust is unlike almost anything else in human life. It takes years to build. It can disappear in a single moment. Unlike money, it cannot simply be earned back through repayment. Unlike physical wounds, it does not always heal with time. Once broken, it often changes relationships forever. For Han Pan, trust was not merely damaged. It was shattered under circumstances no parent should ever experience. The daughter he had spent decades raising became, according to the court's findings on the conspiracy charges, someone involved in planning the attack that nearly ended his own life. Few experiences could produce a greater emotional contradiction. Love does not disappear simply because betrayal occurs. Neither does betrayal erase years of love. Human relationships are rarely governed by simple emotions. They are complicated, layered, and deeply personal. That complexity helps explain why this case continues to affect people who hear about it. Most listeners naturally imagine themselves inside the story. Some imagine being Jennifer, terrified that years of dishonesty are finally collapsing. Others imagine being Han, realizing that someone trusted completely has become connected to unimaginable violence. Parents imagine their own children. Children imagine disappointing their parents. Investigators imagine arriving at the crime scene without knowing what truly happened. Each perspective reveals different emotional truths. That universal quality makes the case unusually powerful. It forces ordinary people to ask extraordinary questions. How much do we really know about those closest to us? Can someone hide an entirely different life behind ordinary daily routines? How can years of deception remain undiscovered inside a family sharing the same home? These questions have no easy answers. Human beings naturally keep private thoughts. Everyone possesses parts of life that remain unseen by others. Privacy itself is healthy. Secrecy becomes dangerous only when it separates reality from the life presented to those who care most deeply. One important lesson emerging from the Jennifer Pan case concerns the difference between perfection and authenticity. Many people spend enormous energy trying to appear successful. Students fear disappointing teachers. Employees fear disappointing employers. Children fear disappointing parents. Social media often magnifies this pressure by encouraging carefully edited versions of everyday life. Failures remain hidden. Achievements become public. Gradually, some individuals begin believing that their value depends entirely upon appearing successful rather than being honest. That belief can become emotionally exhausting. The healthier alternative is authenticity. Authenticity allows room for mistakes, room for failure, room for difficult conversations. Perfection demands constant performance. Authenticity accepts that human beings sometimes struggle. One path creates isolation. The other creates connection. The Jennifer Pan case reminds us how dangerous prolonged performance can become when reality is replaced by illusion. The tragedy also demonstrates why communication matters more than assumptions. Parents often assume children will speak honestly when problems arise. Children often assume parents cannot tolerate disappointment. Sometimes both assumptions prove wrong. Neither side begins the conversation. Silence grows. Misunderstanding deepens. Again, it must be emphasized that communication problems do not explain violent crime. Millions of families experience misunderstandings without criminal consequences. The value of communication lies not in preventing every tragedy, but in reducing the likelihood that fear and isolation become permanent. Open conversations rarely eliminate conflict. They often prevent conflict from becoming hidden. The case further highlights the importance of accountability. Modern society sometimes searches for explanations so intensely that responsibility becomes blurred. Explaining behavior and excusing behavior are fundamentally different. Psychology seeks understanding. The legal system determines accountability. Both perspectives can exist simultaneously. A person may experience pressure. A person may struggle emotionally. A person may fear failure. None of those realities remove responsibility for deliberate criminal actions. That distinction protects both compassion and justice. It allows society to recognize human suffering while maintaining clear moral and legal boundaries. Another remarkable aspect of this case is the professionalism demonstrated throughout the investigation. Detectives did not solve the crime through dramatic intuition. They solved it through patience. Evidence was collected methodically. Statements were verified carefully. Digital records were examined thoroughly. Witness testimony was compared with physical facts. This disciplined approach represents the foundation of modern criminal investigation. The public often celebrates dramatic breakthroughs. Professionals understand that most breakthroughs are earned through countless hours of careful work invisible to television cameras. Perhaps the most extraordinary individual in the entire investigation was Pan himself. Surviving multiple gunshot wounds required extraordinary physical resilience. Testifying afterward required extraordinary emotional resilience. His willingness to tell investigators what he remembered became one important element within a much larger body of evidence. Doing so demanded enormous courage. His testimony was not motivated by revenge. It reflected his obligation to tell the truth as he remembered it. That distinction deserves recognition. Truthfulness often requires tremendous personal sacrifice. The Jennifer Pan case also reminds future investigators of an enduring professional principle. Victims deserve dignity. Evidence deserves objectivity. Suspects deserve fairness. These principles exist together. Investigators honored victims by pursuing the truth. The courts honored fairness by providing legal representation and judicial review. Both responsibilities are essential. Without careful investigation, justice becomes impossible. Without fair procedure, justice loses legitimacy. As years continue to pass, the Jennifer Pan case will undoubtedly remain part of Canada's criminal history. Future documentaries will revisit it. University courses will analyze it. New investigators will study its evidence. Future generations unfamiliar with the original headlines will discover the story for the first time. Each generation may ask different questions. Some will focus upon psychology, others upon forensic science, others upon family relationships or legal procedure. The case contains lessons relevant to all of those fields. Yet perhaps the most valuable lesson lies outside criminal justice entirely. It concerns everyday honesty. Most people will never encounter violent crime. Most people will never appear inside a courtroom. But everyone faces moments when telling the truth feels frightening. Admitting failure, confessing mistakes, asking for help, acknowledging disappointment. These moments define relationships far more than success alone ever can. Jennifer Pan's story demonstrates what can happen when fear repeatedly overcomes honesty. It is an extraordinary example, not because dishonesty inevitably leads to violence, but because it reveals how reality eventually overtakes even the most carefully constructed illusion. No fabricated transcript lasts forever. No invented achievement remains hidden indefinitely. No false identity can permanently replace the truth. Eventually, reality demands recognition. For the Pan family, that moment arrived with devastating consequences. For everyone else, the case offers an opportunity to choose differently. To value honesty over appearance, communication over silence, responsibility over avoidance, and truth over illusion, even when the truth is uncomfortable. Those choices cannot erase what happened on the night of November 8, 2010. Nothing can, but they may help prevent other lives from following similarly destructive paths. That is why the Jennifer Pan case continues to matter. Not because it is one of Canada's most shocking crimes, but because beneath the headlines, beneath the courtroom testimony, and beneath the forensic evidence lies a timeless reminder about the consequences of choices. Some choices build trust. Others slowly destroy it. And in the end, every life is shaped not by one defining moment, but by the countless decisions made long before anyone realizes how important those decisions truly were. Every true crime story eventually reaches a final page. The evidence has been cataloged. The verdict has been delivered. The appeals have followed their legal course. The investigators return to new cases. The reporters move on to new headlines. The courtroom lights grow dark. Yet some stories refuse to end. The Jennifer Pan case is one of them. Its influence extends far beyond a single criminal investigation because it reminds us that the deepest tragedies rarely begin with violence. They begin quietly, with conversations that never happen, with fears that remain unspoken, with truths postponed until tomorrow, then another tomorrow, and another. Years later, those forgotten tomorrows can become impossible to recover. When future historians examine this case, they will undoubtedly remember the extraordinary investigation. They will remember the painstaking reconstruction of phone records, the forensic evidence, the testimony of witnesses, the courtroom proceedings. These are the visible chapters of the story. Less visible are the countless ordinary moments that came before them. A young girl practicing piano, parents working long shifts to provide opportunities they themselves never had, family dinners, school report cards, birthday celebrations, conversations about dreams and expectations. Those moments carried no hint of the tragedy that would eventually follow. That is perhaps the most unsettling reality of all. Life rarely announces the moment when it begins changing forever. Most turning points feel ordinary while they are happening. Only afterward do people recognize their importance. Investigators often describe criminal cases as puzzles. Every interview uncovers another piece. Every forensic report adds another shape. Every witness contributes another color. Eventually, the picture becomes clear. Human life, however, rarely works in reverse. The people living those moments cannot see the completed picture. They only see the next decision waiting before them. That is why responsibility matters so deeply. Each choice seems small while it is being made. Together, those choices create futures no one can completely predict. Throughout this story, one theme has appeared again and again. Truth. Not because truth always protects people from pain. It does not. Honest conversations can be painful. Failure can be painful. Disappointment can be painful. But reality remains easier to confront than an illusion maintained year after year. The Jennifer Pan case demonstrates how deception creates its own momentum. One falsehood demands another. One invented achievement requires another explanation. One hidden mistake gradually transforms into an entirely fabricated existence. Eventually, the person protecting the illusion may begin feeling imprisoned by it. Yet even then, alternatives remain. Confession, accountability, seeking help, accepting consequences before they become irreversible. Those alternatives become more difficult with time, but they never completely disappear until choices eliminate them. Another enduring lesson concerns resilience. The story of Han Pan is often told because he survived multiple gunshot wounds. His physical survival was extraordinary. His emotional survival required an entirely different form of strength. Recovery from violence is rarely measured only by medical reports. It is measured in ordinary mornings, in learning to sleep again, in entering rooms filled with memories, in rebuilding routines after unimaginable loss. Many survivors of violent crime describe recovery not as returning to the person they once were, but as gradually learning how to live with experiences that cannot be erased. That journey deserves recognition. It rarely receives the attention given to dramatic courtroom testimony. Yet it often represents the longest chapter of all. The investigation itself also leaves behind a lasting professional legacy. Young detectives studying homicide investigations may examine this case years from now. Not because they expect identical crimes. Every major investigation is unique. Instead, they will study the discipline demonstrated by the investigators. They will observe how assumptions were tested rather than accepted, how interviews evolved as new evidence emerged, how digital evidence supported, but never replaced, careful investigative reasoning. Professional excellence rarely depends upon dramatic breakthroughs. More often, it depends upon consistency, attention to detail, patience, integrity. These qualities transformed uncertainty into understanding throughout the Jennifer Pan investigation. The legal system likewise demonstrated an important principle. Justice is strongest when it remains careful. Every defendant deserves legal representation. Every significant piece of evidence deserves scrutiny. Every conviction deserves review through established appellate procedures. These safeguards exist not because society doubts every verdict, but because confidence in justice grows when fairness is visible. The Jennifer Pan case continued through multiple stages of legal review after the initial trial, reminding the public that justice is a process rather than a single event. That process protects everyone. Perhaps the greatest legacy of this case, however, belongs neither to investigators nor to the courts. It belongs to ordinary families. Parents and children rarely agree about everything. Expectations differ. Dreams differ. Personalities differ. Conflict itself is not unusual. Silence is often more dangerous than disagreement. Families capable of discussing disappointment honestly possess something more valuable than perfection. They possess trust. Trust allows mistakes to become conversations instead of secrets. Trust allows failure to become temporary rather than defining. Trust creates space where honesty feels safer than performance. No family achieves that balance perfectly. Every relationship experiences misunderstandings. The goal is not perfection. The goal is preserving communication before fear replaces it. As true crime continues growing in popularity around the world, stories like Jennifer Pan's remind audiences of another responsibility. Curiosity should never replace compassion. The victims must remain at the center of the narrative. Behind every police file lies a real human life. Behind every courtroom exhibit lies a grieving family. Behind every documentary lies years of pain that continue long after cameras stop recording. Remembering that humanity separates responsible storytelling from sensationalism. The Jennifer Pan case deserves careful examination because it teaches meaningful lessons about investigation, accountability, and the consequences of deception. It does not require exaggeration. The documented facts are powerful enough on their own. In the end, perhaps the most important question is not why one particular tragedy occurred. That question may never receive a complete answer. Human behavior is too complex for absolute certainty. A more useful question is what society can learn. Investigators learn the value of evidence. Parents learn the importance of communication. Children learn that temporary disappointment is almost always less destructive than years of hidden deception. Educators learn that academic success should never become the sole measure of personal worth. Communities learn that appearances rarely reveal the complete story. And all of us are reminded that integrity is built through countless ordinary choices rather than dramatic moments. The Jennifer Pan case will remain one of Canada's most studied criminal investigations for many years to come. Not because it offers easy answers, but because it refuses to. It asks difficult questions about truth, responsibility, family, trust, identity, justice. Questions that remain relevant far beyond one courtroom or one nation. As this story closes, one image remains. A quiet suburban street where life once appeared completely ordinary. Children played. Neighbors greeted one another. Families returned home after work. Nothing suggested that one house would eventually become known across the world. Perhaps that ordinary setting carries the most meaningful lesson. Extraordinary tragedies often begin in ordinary places. They are prevented not through extraordinary heroism, but through ordinary acts of honesty, compassion, accountability, and communication practiced every single day. Those quiet choices rarely become headlines. Yet they shape lives more profoundly than anyone realizes. And in the end, they may be the strongest defense against the kinds of hidden tragedies that this unforgettable case has come to represent.